The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. We're reading today from the Thom Hartmann Reader here at Thom Hartmann University. This is from page 13. The title is The Story of Carl. Carl loved books and he loved history. After spending 2 years in the Army as part of the American occupation forces in Japan immediately after World War II, Carl was hoping to graduate from college and teach history, perhaps even at the university level, if he could just hang on to the GI Bill and his day job long enough to get his PhD. But in 1950, when he'd been married just a few months, the surprise came that forced him to drop out of college. His wife was pregnant with their first child. This was an era when husbands worked, wives tended the home, and being a good father and provider was one of the highest callings to which a man could aspire. Carl dropped out of school, kept his 9-to-5 job at a camera shop, got a second job at a metal fabricating plant, working with molten metal from 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. For much of his wife's pregnancy and his newborn son's first year, he slept 3 hours a night and caught up on the weekends. But in the process, he earned enough to get them an apartment and prepare for the costs of raising a family. Over the next 45 years, he continued to work in the steel and machine industry. In the later years, as a bookkeeper manager for a Michigan tool and die company, as 3 more sons were born. Carl knew he was doing the right thing when he took that job in the factory, and he did it enthusiastically. Because the auto industry was unionized, he found he was able to support his entire family, all 4 sons, on one paycheck. He had a fully funded health insurance program, an annual vacation, and a good pension waiting for him when he retired. Carl had become a member of the middle class. He may not have achieved his personal dream of teaching history, but he had achieved the American dream. He was self-sufficient and free. Working with molten metal can be dangerous, but the dangers were apparent, and Carl took every protection to protect himself so that he could return home safely to his family. What he didn't realize, however, was that the asbestos used at the casting operation was an insidious poison. He didn't realize that the asbestos industry had known for decades that the stuff could kill, but would continue to profitably market it for another 20 years while actively using its financial muscle to keep the general public in the dark and prevent the government from interfering. A couple of years ago, Carl tripped on the stairs and ended up in the hospital with a compression fracture of his spine. He figured that fall had also caused the terrible pain he'd been experiencing in his abdomen and his chest. Doctors, however, discovered that his lungs were filled with mesothelioma, a rare form of lung cancer that is almost always caused by exposure to asbestos. Mesothelioma is terminal, and its victims die by a slow and painful suffocation. Just because some corporation put profit before people, Carl got screwed. I was Carl's first child. My dad faced a painful death, but at least his job in a union shop left him with health care after retirement. Most Americans don't even have that reassurance anymore. More than 45 million Americans don't have health insurance to cover expenses for a serious illness, and 5 million lost their health insurance between 2001 and 2005, which is when I wrote this. And it's not just illness that worries most Americans today. Americans are working more and making less, getting harder and harder to just get by. There's a reason for the pain Americans are suffering. The America my dad grew up in put people or profits. The America we live in now puts profits above people. In my dad's America, 35% of working people were union members who got a living wage, health insurance, and defined benefit pensions. These union benefits lifted all boats because they set the floor for employment. For every union job, there was typically a non-union job with similar pay and benefits, meaning roughly 70% of the American workforce back then could raise a family on a single paycheck. People who were disabled and couldn't work could live on Social Security payments, and the elderly knew that they would have a safe retirement, paid for by pensions, Social Security, and Medicare. The gap between the richest and the poorest had shrunk rather than widened. That America is disappearing fast. The minimum wage is not a living wage. Workers are now expected to pay for their own health insurance and their own retirement. Pension plans are disappearing. 30,000 General Motors employees lost theirs just in 2005, and there's continued talk about privatizing Social Security, the Republicans' grand goal. The safety net is ripping apart, and the results are that the middle class is shrinking. The rich are once again getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. The inflation-adjusted average annual pay of a CEO went up from $7.7 million to $9.6 million just between 2002 and 2004. Meanwhile, from 2002 to 2004, the inflation-adjusted median annual household income went down from $46,058 to $44,300. In other words, ordinary people's income went down by $1,600, while CEO pay went up by $1.8 million a year. From 2001 to 2005, America has lost 2,800 manufacturing jobs just in 3 years. If you don't count jobs produced by the military-industrial complex, the number of private sector jobs created since 2001 decreased by 1,160,000. Although 67% of large employees, well, you get where we're going with this. Anyhow, it's the Thom Hartmann Reader.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Wow, there is. Just reading The Guardian this morning. I think I mentioned this, a month or two ago, that it's essentially become my go-to newspaper now. I start with The Guardian, then I go to the Financial Times, and I go to the New York Times, then I go to various websites. But the Thomas Frank has a piece in today's Guardian that is so worth going out of your way to read. And I want to share some pieces of it with you. And I want to tie this to the French elections and to what happened here in Washington, D.C. yesterday that you did not hear about on the corporate news. So let's see, where to begin. Thomas Frank's piece. Thomas Frank, the piece is titled, "The Midwest is Longing for Populism. Can Democrats Offer That in 2018? Thomas Frank, of course, he wrote What's the Matter with Kansas. His most recent book, Listen Liberal, is really worth reading. And the essential message of Listen Liberal is that the Republican Party has decided, decided back in the 70s and 80s to cater, at least with regard to legislative priorities, exclusively to the top 1%. They speak the language of guns and gays and gods, or hating gays and God fearing people and all that kind of stuff. But really, when it comes to legislation, the Republican Party is entirely the top 1%. But the Democratic Party, and Thomas Frank documents this just in excruciating detail in his book, Listen Liberal, has, at least since the 1990s, been the party of the top 10%. And the bottom 90% of America has been largely left behind. So Frank, he's apparently working on his next book. He just traveled through the Midwest. And he's a Midwesterner himself. He grew up in Kansas. I grew up in Michigan. We both know the Midwest. And he says, what I'm here to say is that the Midwest is not an exotic place. It's not a benighted region of unknowable people and mysterious urges. It isn't backward or hopelessly superstitious or hostile to learning. It's solid, familiar, ordinary America, and Democrats have no excuse for not seeing the wave of heartland rage that swamped them last November. Another thing that is inexcusable from Democrats, surprise at the economic disasters that have befallen the Midwestern cities and states that they used to represent. The wreckage that you see every day as you tour part of this country is the utterly predictable fruit of the Democratic Party's neoliberal turn. Now, I would add, the Republicans were really the ones driving this train. The Democratic Party signed off on it, and yeah, Bill Clinton signed NAFTA, but the majority of Democrats in the House and the Senate voted against it, something that Frank seems to miss in this piece, and I think it's important to insert. Trump and apparently, you know, much of the Republican Party, this whole populist thing of, you know, we hate free trade, we're going to renegotiate NAFTA, which Americans left, right, and middle are celebrating, is the classic and traditional Democratic Party position. Bill Clinton was opposed to his own party, opposed by his own party with NAFTA. NAFTA was passed through Congress with a majority Republican votes in the House, or Republican votes in the Senate, and a majority of the Democrats in the House and a majority of the Democrats in the Senate voted no on NAFTA. So anyhow, back to Thomas Frank. Every time our liberal leaders signed off on some lousy trade deal, figuring that working class people had, quote, nowhere else to go, end quote. I think that's a phrase from the guy who's now the mayor of Rahm Emanuel, when he was Barack Obama's chief of staff. They were making what happened last November a little more likely. Every time our liberal leaders deregulated banks and then turned around and told working class people that their misfortunes were all attributable to their poor education, that the only answer for them was a lot of student loans and the right sort of college degree, every time they did this, they made a disaster a little more inevitable. Well, again, the liberalization of the banks, I mean, the deregulation of the banks, yes, Clinton supported that, but the Democratic Party did not. And the majority of Democrats in the House and Senate voted against those things. Again, I just, you know, for the record. So anyhow, Thomas Frank, he concludes, well, he doesn't conclude, but he goes on to say, what we need is a Democratic Party and its media enablers. And they have been more firmly in the kind of neoliberal, Thomas Frank refers to it as the Davos crowd bank. And I would say, you know, that and this is not to pick on Clinton, there's a group within the Democratic Party, and they infected the Labour Party in the UK as well, which just destroyed Tony Blair, by the way, you know, with his new Labour, just like Bill Clinton had the new Democrats, which is the Democrats of Davos, right? The Democrats of multilateralism, the Democrats of deregulating the banks, the Democrats of international trade deals. What Thomas Frank writes is the party needs actually to change. It's not enough to just hear people's voices and feel their pain. The Democratic Party needs to understand that the enlightened Davos ideology they embraced over the years has done material harm to millions of their own former constituents. The Democrats need to offer something different next time, and then they need to deliver. Something with which I totally agree. But continuing along these lines, Barack Obama, President Obama, is going to give a speech to Cantor Fitzgerald, one of the investment banks, for $400,000. The op-ed, or excuse me, the official editorial position of the Guardian newspaper today, the headline, The Guardian View on Barack Obama, Don't Go Chasing Wall Street Cash. They say, you know, they talk about how, you know, he was a pretty good president, and he can claim lots of credit. He killed bin Laden, the Iran nuclear deal, opening up Cuba. But now he has emerged that he's about to be paid $400,000 to speak at a Wall Street conference. This is a mistake. He should give the fee to charity, says the editorial board of The Guardian. What message does this send to young people, they write? That a career in politics is a way of getting rich? Tony Blair destroyed his reputation by chasing money. Hillary Clinton's standing among left-wing voters was sunk by her own highly paid speeches to Goldman Sachs. Mr. Obama does not need the money. He and Michelle have a two-book deal worth $65 million. His success rested on the symbolism of hope. Don't tarnish it now. I agree with that also. And then we get this fascinating piece. This is by Damon Linker, and it's over in The Week magazine and WEEK. The global elite think they're sitting pretty. How wrong they are. Democrats keep telling themselves Hillary Clinton really won the election, or would have if it hadn't been for Vladimir Putin and James Comey. Republicans keep patting themselves in the back about how much power they have at all levels of government. And the centrists in Europe are saying, Emmanuel Macron is going to win in France. You can almost hear the sentiments echoing down the corridors of political and economic power on both sides of the Atlantic. There's nothing to worry about. Everything's fine. No need for serious soul searching or changes of direction. Sure, populism's a nuisance, but we're keeping it at bay. We just need to stay the course, fiddle around the edges a little bit, and certainly not give an inch to the racists and the xenophobes who are making trouble. We know how the world works. We can handle the necessary fine-tuning of the meritocracy. Then he goes on to point out that the folks who are saying this are I don't know if this is a word, the meritocracy-crats, whatever. Why wouldn't they think this way? They themselves are the greatest beneficiaries of the global meritocracy. And that very fact serves to validate its worth. They live in the urban centers that are booming with jobs in tech, finance, media that they can get because they went to the best colleges. And then he says the problem is that growing numbers of people here in the United States, in the UK, in France, and beyond don't see it like this at all. Or rather, they only see it from the outside, a position that looks very different. What they see is a system that's fundamentally unjust, rigged, and shot through with corruption and self-dealing. They see Marissa Mayer, the CEO of Yahoo, taking home a cool $186 million in stock after 5 years of basically screwing the company up. They see Henrique de Castro, who worked briefly for Meyer at Yahoo, putting $109 million in compensation for 15 months on the job. They see Roger Ailes and Bill O'Reilly getting fired from Fox News and then taking home tens of millions of dollars each in severance. They see former Democratic President Barack Obama sharing a $65 million book advance with his wife and earning $400,000 for a single speech, and gallivanting around the globe with David Geffen, Bruce Springsteen, Tom Hanks, Oprah Winfrey, and Bono. In Washington, they see a President, Trump, who promised to act as the people's voice, appointing a long list of billionaires and millionaires to top positions. They see the White House and Congress struggling to pass a health care bill that will leave millions more without insurance coverage at a time when the majority of Americans and a plurality of Republicans favor a single-payer system that would cover all. And he goes on in the piece, he says, unless something fundamentally changes, the gap separating these worlds will only increase economically, culturally, and psychologically. And then we go to France. In France, the two candidates right now, Emmanuel Macron is solidly in the neoliberal camp of, that fraction of the Democratic Party that I was talking about earlier, who are actually in favor of deregulating banks and in favor of, international trade deals and all these kind of things. That's Macron. He wants France to stay in the EU. He wants to keep the open borders so anybody can come, anybody from any EU country can come live in France and work in France. He supports the offshoring of French jobs, literally. And, saying, these are terrible factory. This is the argument that Bill Clinton gave us back in the 90s. Who wants to work at a factory? You should go to college, get trained, get a white collar job. And so here, this piece is... this is published by Agence France Presse, and they say Le Pen has stolen some of the pro-European candidate's thunder by visiting. He was going to visit a factory, and here's the weird thing: it's a Whirlpool factory, U.S. company, that is scheduled to be moved to Poland. So all these French workers are about to lose their jobs, and Le Pen goes there, and she says, "I'm going to close the borders, and I'm going to keep the jobs here." Marine Le Pen, yes, the Nazi, the fascist, the whatever you want to call her. And she's cheered by the workers. Macron shows up a couple hours later, and they boo him. This guy's 39 years old. He's a rising star, but he is a former investment banker, and he's totally neoliberal in all this. And so, Agence France Presse, they're saying, hey, it's entirely possible. Le Pen has called for France to take back control of its borders from the European Union and deport all foreigners on a terror watch list, accusing Macron of being soft on security, among other things. So you got all that. And then meanwhile, I get this tweet from Keith Ellison, which is brilliant. On the same day Democrats were rallying around a $15 minimum wage, the Republicans unveiled a massive tax cut for corporations and the super rich. That should be the story, right? What Keith Ellison tweeted. But I didn't see it on MSNBC. I didn't see it on CNN. I'm sure it wasn't on Fox that the Democrats yesterday rolled out in Congress and in a press conference a $15 national minimum wage. So large parts of the Democratic Party are moving in the right direction, but our corporate media refuses to even discuss it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And unless they can figure out a way to break through, this is a potential disaster in 2018 and 2020. If they can break through, it could be a huge success. And welcome back. Kathy in Pleasant Hill, Missouri, watching Free Speech TV on the DirecTV satellite. Hey, Kathy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'd just like to thank you for the education that you provide.
Thank you.
I'd like to speak to your Missouri listeners.
Okay.
The petition to let Missouri voters decide if Missouri should become a right-to-work state is out. Jefferson City has decided that on August 28th, right to work will become law, and Missouri will be the 28th right-to-work state. So we need 160,000 signatures by August 27th to get it on the ballot. Otherwise, it becomes law on August 28th.
Wow.
I went to a training event, and I'm gathering signatures now. If people will just Google, if they're not sure where to get the petition, if they would just Google a local union hall in their area, they're going to be everywhere for that, in every union hall. And they're also going to be available during the many fairs that we have, county fairs and stuff during the summer. So right. Your Missouri listeners, if they want to find this petition, we really want the signatures.
Yeah, that's a great one. Thank you for the heads up on that, Kathy, and I'll repeat that later on in the program too. What's happening in Missouri. Thank you for that. I appreciate the call. Thank you. Melvin, watching Free Speech TV in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Hey, Melvin, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, Tom?
Good.
I just want to talk to you about when people say it doesn't matter who's in charge. Well, Jeff Sessions, when he became the Attorney General and he announced that he was going to amp up the drug war.
Yeah.
Well, no sooner than about couple of weeks later, a small town in Arkansas, Truman, Arkansas, decided they had a drug problem. And, the landlords of that town, with the power of eviction and the courts and the police in their back pocket have decided that the drug problem is the citizens of that town, and they're going to harass, they're going to evict, they're going to use the courts to use nuisance laws to, put people in prison and all, and these people have nothing to do with the drug problem that they're experiencing. This is all code for races. It's people of color who they're going after. And it's happening all over Arkansas. It's really, really starting to get ugly down here in Arkansas, man. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah,
racism that's unleashed by these people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, John Ehrlichman, just a few years ago, I'm not sure if he's still alive, but he told a reporter, speaking of Nixon's drug war, he said, say what? For Harper's Magazine. Thank you, Trey. He said that, back in the late 60s, early 70s, he said, the Nixon administration had two enemies, anti-war hippies and black people. And he said, and we realized we couldn't make it illegal to be an anti-war hippie or to be black, but what we did was we heavily criminalized heroin and marijuana and then used those laws to disrupt those communities. And we were quite successful. He said, did we know that that this was a phony war on drugs? Yes, we knew it. It was all political. You can easily, Google that or DuckDuckGo or whatever that quote from John Ehrlichman. So, that's exactly what's going on, and that's what Jeff Sessions has been doing his whole life. The Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III should tell you something. Melvin, thank you for the call, and thanks for the heads up on that. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And just to wrap this up, this is, you know, the punchline, I think, here. The Democratic Party is changing. And it's a very, very good thing. And the Democratic Party is getting back to its FDR roots, back to its Great Society roots, back to being the party of the working people, of the people. The problem is that the majority of the so-called Democratic commentators that you will see on network television, who are paid a couple $1,000s every time they show up, if they're identified as a contributor for the network, it's a paid gig. The majority of them are part of this inside the Beltway old boy network. You have these people like Harold Ford Jr., you know, who used to run the DLC, right? And they're put out as the voice of the Democratic Party. That's nuts. But see, for the networks that want neoliberalism, you know, it's very profitable for them. They want deregulation. They don't want, you know, an active government, that, you know, working on behalf of the working people, even their own employees in many cases. They're you know, trying to bust unions and whatnot. The networks don't want to talk about, you know, the you could call it populist issues. I'm wary of using that word because it's being demonized so aggressively by these neoliberal Democrats and by, frankly, neoliberal Republicans who are using it to attack Trump and Bannon. But the reality is that both in the United States and in France, people, and frankly in the UK, this is what you saw with Brexit. People are saying, enough already. We're sick and tired of politicians who get rich being politicians. We're sick and tired of politicians who take, you know, like the guy that we've been talking about for the last 2 days, take a $33,000 contribution to propose legislation that's going to make $90 million for a company that's in the business of issuing prepaid debit cards so that they can rip people off, right? We're sick of it. We're sick of politicians self-dealing. We're sick of the Republican Party saying, yeah, we're going to tear down Obamacare, except for ourselves. We're going to put a loophole in there that says that members of Congress and their staffs still get all those Obamacare protections about, you know, you can't throw people off their policies if you get sick or if they get sick, and you can't charge people more if they're sick and pre-existing conditions, all this kind of stuff. You know, people are sick of it. They're sick of the self-dealing. They're sick of the hypocrisy. They're sick of the we know better than you, and they want another FDR. And I'm telling you, FDR, the way that FDR presented himself to America on the left is the way that in the early years Hitler presented himself to Germany on the right. Beware of right-wing populism. Hang on.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Because only left-wing populism can beat it. And if the Democratic Party doesn't aggressively embrace left-wing populism, we're all screwed.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader. And this is from page 39, chapter titled An Informed and Educated Electorate. The epigraph, the quote that opens the chapter, is from Thomas Jefferson. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Whenever the people are well informed, however, they can be trusted with their own government, that whenever things get so far wrong as to attract their notice, they may be relied upon to set them right. Into the chapter. Talk radio news service based in Washington, D.C. is owned and run by my dear friend Ellen Ratner. Ellen is an experienced and accomplished journalist, and a large number of interns and young journalism school graduates get their feet wet in reporting by working for her. In March 2010, I was in Washington for a meeting with a group of senators, and I needed a studio from which to do my radio and TV show. Ellen was gracious enough to offer me hers. I arrived as 3 of her interns were producing a panel discussion type of TV show for web distribution at talkmedianews.com, in which they were discussing for their viewing audience their recent experiences on Capitol Hill. One intern panelist related that a White House correspondent for one of the big 3 TV networks had told her that the network registered a huge amount of interest in the hot story that week of a congressman's sexual indiscretions. Far less popular were stories about the debates on health care, the conflicts in the Middle East, and even the Americans who had died recently in Iraq or Afghanistan. The intern said, so that's the story they have to run with on the news, relating the substance of the network's correspondents' thoughts, because that's what the American people want to see. If the network doesn't give people what they want to see, viewers will tune away and the network won't have any viewers, ratings, or revenues. The other 2 interns commiserated with the first about what a shame it was that Americans wanted the titillating stories instead of the substantive ones, but they accepted without question that the network was therefore obliged to, quote, give people what they want, end quote. When they finished their panel discussion, I asked these college students if they knew that there was a time in the United States when radio and TV stations and news networks broadcast the actual news instead of infotainment because the law required them to. None of them had any idea what I was talking about. But the reality is that from the 1920s, when radio really started going big in the United States, until Reagan rolled it back in 1987, federal communications law required a certain amount of public service programming from radio and television stations as a condition of retaining their broadcast licenses. The agreement was basic and simple. In exchange for the media owners being granted a license from the Federal Communications Commission to use their airwaves, owned by the public, they had to serve the public interest first, and only then could they go about the business of making money. If they didn't do so, when it came time to renew their license, public groups and individuals could show up at public hearings on the license renewal and argue for the licenses being denied. One small way that stations lived up to their public service mandate was by airing public service announcements for local nonprofit groups, community calendars, and other charitable causes. They also had to abide by something called the Fairness Doctrine, which required them to air diverse viewpoints on controversial issues. Separately, during election campaigns, broadcasters had to abide by the equal time rule, which required them to provide equal airtime to rival candidates in any election. But the biggest way that they proved that they were providing a public service and meeting the requirements of the Fairness Doctrine was by broadcasting the news, real news, actual news, local, national, and international news produced by professional old-school journalists. Because the news didn't draw huge ratings like entertainment shows, although tens of millions of Americans did watch it every night on TV and listen to it at the top of every hour on radio from coast to coast. And because real news was expensive to produce, with bureaus and correspondents all over the world, news was a money loser for all of the big 3 TV networks and for most local and radio and national radio and TV stations. But it was such a sacred thing. This was, after all, the keystone that held together the station's license to broadcast and thus to do business. It didn't matter if it lost money. It made all the other money-making things possible. Through much of the early 1970s, I worked in the newsroom of a radio station in Lansing, Michigan. It had been started and was then run by 3 local guys, an engineer, a salesman, and a radio broadcaster. They split up the responsibilities like you expect, and all were around the building most days and would hang out from time to time with the on-air crew, all except the sales guy. I was forbidden from talking with him because I worked in news. There could be no hint, ever, anywhere, that our radio station had violated the FCC's programming in the public interest mandate by, for example, my going easy on an advertiser in a news story or promoting another advertiser in a different story. News had to be news, separate from profits and revenue. And if it wasn't, I'd be fired on the spot. News, in other words, wasn't part of the free market. It was part of our nation's intellectual commons, and thus the price of the station's license. After Reagan blew up the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, 2 very interesting things happened. The first was the rise of right-wing hate speech talk radio, starting with Rush Limbaugh that very year. The second, which really stepped up after President Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of '96, was that the money-losing news divisions of the big three television networks were taken under the wings of their entertainment divisions and wrung dry. Foreign bureaus were closed, reporters were fired, stories that promoted the wonders of advertisers owned by the same mega corporations began to appear, and investigative journalism began to die. It's the Thom Hartmann Reader.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. And some really nice comments here on Twitter. Much appreciated. And our chat room. Thank you so much. Let's pick up some phone calls here and see what people have to say about, my thoughts on this. I mean, this is what I'm calling for is basically what Tom Perez and Bernie Sanders were doing over the last couple of weeks, this tour across the United States, this unity tour, trying to bring it together. And yes, I know there are these nattering nanobs who are, Democrats, in quotes, who are going on TV going, oh, well, Bernie supported somebody who used to support anti-abortion laws and now is personally opposed to abortion but no longer supports the laws. Oh, my God, that's not, we've got to criticize him for that. And it's like, really? Or Bernie didn't support John Ossoff, and John Ossoff didn't ask for Bernie's support. It's like no good deed goes unpunished. And this isn't about Bernie at all. It's about it's just that he's the most visible face of basically the FDR faction inside the Democratic Party, which should be, most of the Democratic Party. And people say, oh, but, you can't have an FDR Democrat get elected in West Virginia or in Mississippi, to which I say nonsense. Or in Michigan, you can't have an FDR. Come on, Bernie won Michigan by 20 points in the primary. This is straightforward stuff. Michael in Stuttgart, Germany. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Yes. Hello, Tom. Good to speak to you. I just wanted to offer a slightly different point of view as far as your comments about Marine Le Pen calling for closing the borders, etc.
Right.
I think it's not often known that there's almost no way back. If you think that there's 3.5 million Germans already living throughout Europe and working, and millions of French working also, the number of French, for example, and German companies that have merged, the number of co-productions, for example, Renault working with Smart. All the components of a lot of the, products that are produced here are produced in the various countries throughout Europe.
Right, and this is why she's on.
To say that she wants to close the borders and bring all the jobs back to France, that's a pipe dream. That's just definitely.
No, I understand that, and what she is saying is that she wants to expel foreigners who have committed crimes. Not all foreigners, but you're seeing this process. You're seeing UK go through this right now, trying to decide, who gets to say who has to leave. And what about British nationals who are in Europe? And it's going to get really, really messy and really sticky. But, it's either going to work out really well or really bad for Britain. And that's going to inform the rest of Europe. But you're right. The European integration has been quite substantial. But I don't think it's been substantial enough to overcome nationalism. And nationalism emerges during times of difficulty. France right now has a 10% unemployment rate, which is huge. 10% unemployment is the stuff that creates revolutions, and or higher. You can get into 15%. And at the same time, you've got the EU telling France that they cannot stimulate their own economy by deficit spending because their deficit can't go above a certain percentage, and et cetera. They basically have to comply with all of these EU austerity rules. And which is, and the EU is this neoliberal experiment, which it looks from this side not to be all that successful for anybody except largely Germany, Michael.
Well, I think I wouldn't quite agree with that. I think if you look at the main divides, there's the rural urban divide, the same way we have in the States, in the sense of the ones supporting Macron, not necessarily because he's neoliberal, because one hand there's no other choice, and on the other he has called for a really major reform of the European Union to make it more democratic, to add actually more to it. So that's one part of it. And the other divide is age, the same as with the Brexit. I live here, and the young people, they can study in 24 different countries.
Right.
Free.
Right.
The British youth, they lost all of that.
Yeah.
They lost all that possibility to study a semester or a year or 2 years in Spain, and so this whole international aspect has been lost to them. And I think that's where you come with the urban French that would say that they don't want to do away with the EU. They'd like to modernize it or at least reform it, but to lose that possibility to have the open borders and to study and live where one wants to live, I think that's just too attractive.
Yeah.
And that mobility enables them, to find actually better work. The same way mobility in the States helped people to find work. If there was no work in, Alabama, they moved to Texas. So.
Right. Yeah, except that I can't. I'm not well informed enough about how the European Union works to debate the nuance of it. But my understanding is that in Germany, particularly because of the predominance of the labor unions, it's much harder for somebody from Poland, for example, to just show up in Germany and say, hire me. Whereas it was much easier for them to do that in the UK because Thatcher had done such a good job of destroying the unions in the UK, and they're not built into the Constitution of the UK like they are the Constitution of Germany. So Germany has internally, and between that and the VAT tax, has internally some, which does not apply inside the EU, I understand, but, outside the EU. Germany has some protections built in that have insulated it to a large extent. Germany is pretty much the only country, I believe, in the EU that has not seen an average decline of the top 10 countries in the EU, that has not seen a decline in wages and standard of living. Instead of seeing an increase. Whereas, the poorer countries, the Polands and whatnot, they have seen an increase. So there's been, this lifting of the poor countries, but it's been accompanied by a depression of the rich countries, the most prominent being France, and of course also Spain, Italy, Portugal, Ireland. And this, I don't know how long this can continue, Michael.
Yeah, I agree with that point. It's really questionable in one sense if they'll be able to push through the needed reforms. But on the other hand, there is a process to go through. It's not like just a Polish can show up in Germany or in France, for that matter. France has also very strong unions, if not stronger than in Germany.
Yeah.
But they play a slightly different role, and they don't play the same role in corporations, for example, although they are very strong.
Right.
And they're seen basically even more as an impediment to reform. So that's one thing also to look at. So the thing with Poland is one example. They've come up, but there were also agreements at the beginning when other former East Bloc countries joined the EU that there would be some restrictions as far as how easy it would be for them to come in to other European countries and work. So
right.
That was already worked into the original agreement. There was basically a phase-in period where Romania and certain countries like that, they still basically don't have a free right of free movement.
Do you think that there's a chance that Le Pen can win the election in France?
I think I work for a French company, actually, and I live in Germany. But I think Le Pen does have a chance. I think what I've been hearing is basically she has a chance if all of the people who are basically saying they're going to abstain from voting, if they really go ahead with that, and
right. Well, Mélenchon is not supporting Macron. This is the big problem. Mélenchon is sort of the Bernie Sanders of France, and he came in fourth, but he was only 3 points behind, Macron and Le Pen. And he's saying don't vote for Le Pen. He came out and said that yesterday, but he will not say vote for Macron, and so that's going to be real problematic, is it not?
Yes and no. I think on one hand that if there's an indirect, basically pushing people to see the alternatives, that I think some of the candidates who lost should not openly endorse because that's extra baggage. So for example, Filon, who lost, and basically within 3 minutes of losing,
he endorsed Macron.
He came out and endorsed Macron, and that's like saying, well, here we are, the establishment, we're behind you.
But that's what Bernie did with Hillary here in the United States. He immediately endorsed her and then campaigned for her. And had he not, I think things would have gone much worse than they did. So anyhow, Michael, we're out of time, but thank you for the call. I welcome the European perspective. It's fascinating talking to you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls after this. Welcome back. Pat in North Little Rock, Arkansas. Hey, Pat, thanks for watching Free Speech TV on Dish Network. What's up? Pat, can you hear me? Oh, Pat, you got to listen to your phone, not your TV. Dave in Seattle, listening on KBCS. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hey, listen, I have a very simple question, and I'd love to start with a rare shout out to 2 Republican congresspeople, if I could.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. I'd love to thank my nearby Congresswoman, Republican Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler of Vancouver, Washington, for coming out publicly and early against Trump Care, and my former Congressman Rodney Frelinghuysen of the Venerable Frelinghuysen family of Northern New Jersey, chairman of the Finance Committee, for coming out on the floor against Trump Care. And I want them to stay strong, and I think they deserve at least our support in spirit.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a group of undecided and a group of holdout Republicans who are probably going to prevent this thing from passing. The Republican Party, they had it down how to be the opposition party, which the Democrats haven't quite figured out yet. But the Republicans had it down, how to do political theater, how to get the news media going, how to capture the media cycle, how to vilify the other side, how to play the aggrieved victim, all that kind of stuff. The Republicans had that completely figured out. They don't have a frigging clue how to run a country. And it's coming back to bite them.
It's absolutely true. Our problem is that, to me, the Democrats divided about in half in 2008. And it's been the unreported story in American politics since then. And we've never healed the divide. And
what was the division in 2008?
Just simple Obama Hillary. We had about 40, 50. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and Obama actually in the primary against Hillary, he was essentially saying, "I am not a neoliberal." He was almost being a Bernie. And, he said he wanted to re-examine NAFTA. In fact, we've got a clip of him saying that, that he's going to renegotiate NAFTA, that he was in favor of single-payer health care. This was during the primary against Hillary in 2008. And Hillary Clinton was being cast as the neoliberal candidate of the establishment, of the reinvention of Bill Clinton, and was actually embracing that position. Yes, I'm the candidate of stability. He's the candidate of, he's got a good speech, right? That was the phrase that Hillary used. And I think you're right. I think that was a schism in the party. That should have alerted us. And then, of course, Obama did not govern the way that he had campaigned in the primary. Now, he didn't much campaign that way in the general election. By that time, a lot of people had kind of forgotten the positions that he was taking. But he was governing more as a DLC Democrat than as a populist or progressive Democrat, which is, I think was unfortunate. But, at the same time, we have to acknowledge that anything that he had tried to do would have been blocked by the Republicans. And I think maybe he thought he could work with the Republicans if he just became a little more neoliberal. Whatever. I don't know what's in his heart or his mind. But Dave, thanks for the call. Excellent point. I hadn't considered it. Excellent point. We'll be right back. Coming up on 12 Minutes Before the End. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let me just be very clear. I am not calling for party purity. I'm not one of those people who wants to purge people out of the party because they don't agree with my way, my view of how the party should be. I think that, it's fine that if we have, pro-life Democrats. I think it's fine if we have Democrats who think that we should deregulate the banks. If they can get themselves elected in their districts and if the people support them in those positions, God bless them. And the Democratic Party needs to continue to be a big tent party. But the party itself, the direction that the major ship is going, if it does not return, and it is, but it has, the Democrats have to, if it does not return to its FDR roots, it's going to be in trouble. And I think it is. But the thing is that the Republicans are so good at being the opposition party that, they figured out how to manipulate the media. They figured out how to get the people on their side as the opposition. Now, they don't have a frigging clue, as I said earlier, about how to govern. The Democrats know how to govern, but they haven't figured out yet how to be the opposition party, like rolling out this $15 minimum wage yesterday, which was a major announcement, huge press conference, and legislation being introduced into Congress. And did you see one mention of it on any of the network news shows? One mention. I didn't. I mean, maybe it was there. But, it should have been the top news all day long. Instead, it was Trump, 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 Trump. Because, as Les Moonves, the head of CBS, says, Trump may not be good for America, but he's great for CBS. David in Des Moines, Iowa. Hey, David, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom.
Hey, David.
Hey, I normally agree with you, and I really agree with you, but my anger has just put me on a different path. And part of it is really my fellow Americans, my fellow people that I run into every day that work just regular job, punch the time clock, and then they go out and they vote for these Republicans, and they vote to basically get rid of everything that Democrats have fought for years.
But see, that's not what they're voting for, David. I mean, that's what they're going to get. But what they think they're voting for is ending NAFTA. What they think they're voting for is reclaiming, a traditional America, whatever the hell that means. What they think they're voting for is functionally safety, security, and prosperity. That's the sales pitch that. Go ahead.
Here's the thing. I am so tired of trying to re-educate these people and get them to read a newspaper or just be in tune to what's going on. Because the fact of the matter is, I'm at the point where I'm like, they wanted Trump. They knew what he was about. There is no way you can tell me that you can sit here and watch this election and not know that this man was not qualified. And the fact that he still has a 42% approval rating is beyond imagination. I mean, it's crazy to me. And people are saying that President Obama shouldn't take the money and for these speeches. No, he should, because to me, he did everything he could. He talked, he gave speeches, he was a great president, and we left him hanging. We didn't do anything for him. I mean, he was attacked at every angle, and we sat there, and not only did we allow them to do what they did, we then turned around and they benefited from it.
David, we elected him president twice.
Right.
I don't consider that leaving somebody hanging.
Well, we left him hanging.
And you will find no bigger advocates for the Obama presidency during the Obama presidency than me on this program. And what I'm saying is it's bad optics. He doesn't need the $400,000. He shouldn't go to Wall Street and give a speech for it.
Totally take it. To me, I feel like get the money for,
He just got $65 million for a book deal. Does he really need 400 grand?
I hope he gets 150 million.
He is harming his legacy. He is saying to young people, go into politics because someday you'll be able to get a $400,000 speaking fee.
Why are the Democrats constantly trying to save people who don't want to be saved? That's the point I'm making here. And
I don't know what that means.
Went out of his way to save people that don't want to be saved. We deserve Donald Trump, because that's what we got, and that's what we deserve. And until they get...
See, I don't think we deserve Donald Trump. I think we were sold a bill of goods by Donald Trump, we being the American people. We were sold a bill of goods by him and by the Republican Party. They lied. They lie with great facility. And a lot of people believed those lies and, frankly, continue to believe those lies, which is why he still has the popularity rating that he does and why, in the last survey that was done, it showed that if the election were redone today, the result would be pretty much the same. I think that's, people are still believing the lies, and it's going to take a while to wring that out. David, I have to move along, but thank you for the call. Natalie in Seattle. Hey, Natalie, what's up?
Well, hello, Tom. I'm very happy to hear you saying that we need some reform, and you're okay with if the party would kind of branch out a little, because we had that conversation a couple of months ago. This is what's happening in France, too. People at this point are tired by bipartisan, and it's very clear. They're also tired of globalization. They're scared. In France, there's the problem with the EU also. So in regards to the two choices are clear, but they decided to do with that the Socialist Party and with that the Republicans. But there were not just two candidates, interestingly enough. There are four. Of the two that came under, including Mélenchon, came really close at 19%. So,
and three of those four candidates were calling for a major realignment or even a withdrawal from the EU.
Reform.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is clear. I mean, we're living in the time of reform with democracy, reform with the political life. I mean, obviously, people.
Well, you can call it reform, Natalie. I would say that we're living in a time of oops. That people are saying this neoliberal experimental of the last 40 years that included, Reaganism and the DLCism in the Democratic Party here in the United States, and that was the European Union experiment, and particularly the Schengen Agreement and the Eurozone, the common currency in Europe. That those things are being reevaluated now. People are looking at them and saying, did we really get the benefit of this, or did most of the benefit go to the top 1%? And it's fairly clear that most of the benefit went to the top 1%, both in the United States and in Europe.
So I want to clear up one thing with what happened is that some people called out to vote for Macron, which is a centrist and a neoliberal. However, Mélenchon did this. His spokesperson said to the voters, you have three choices. It's up to you. You actually have, in France, we do have what we call a white vote, so a blank vote. Mm-hmm. So basically, you can abstain and stay home. You can vote for nobody, but still show that you have voted. You can vote for someone. And they can vote for, Macron if they want to. So there are three choices. That's what they called for. They said, you're a voter, and you can actually, those three choices are yours.
And that's how it's set up now for the May 7th election? Or they were calling for that?
They're just told they told the voters, they said you have three choices. You stay home, that's your right. You show up and you vote blank, or you vote for Macron. You have those, and they called it.
Yeah, in the United States, half the people stay home.
Yeah, well, in France, it would be nice. Unfortunately, we don't know really. What we do, for some reason, we can't measure that. It was 20%, 22% in the first round of people abstain and stay at home, but because a blank vote is considered a vote. But
what's your point?
Three legitimate choices. They did say, however, that there is no other legitimate party that they should consider. So basically, they mentioned. That suppose that Le Pen is not legitimate.
Yeah. No, Mélenchon has now come out and said don't vote for Le Pen. But I want to get this back to American politics. And Natalie, thanks so much for the call. I want to get this back to American politics. I think by taking two calls about European politics, we just kind of derailed the show here. We're going to get back to this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit Free Speech Beets. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. This is from page 98, the subchapter, The Supreme Court Takes Over. As Charles and Mary Beard, they were famous historians in the 1930s, wrote in The Rise of American Civilization, which is their famous historical record of the United States, quote, "But the states had to reckon with the Federalist interpretation of the Constitution by John Marshall, who, as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States from 1801 to 1835, never failed to exalt the pro-business doctrines of Hamilton above the claims of the states. Marshall, appointed to the court by Federalist John Adams, who had appointed for life only Federalists to all federal judgeships, was what today would be called a judicial activist. As the Beards wrote, quote, by historic irony, he, Marshall, administered the oath of office to his bitterest enemy, Thomas Jefferson. And for a quarter of a century after the author of the Declaration of Independence retired to private life, the stern Chief Justice continued to announce old Federalist rulings from the Supreme Bench. In 1803, during the second year of Jefferson's presidency, Marshall took on a power for himself and future Supreme Courts that made President Jefferson apoplectic. In the Marbury v. Madison case, as the Beards related, quote, Marshall had been in his high post only 2 years when he laid down for the first time, in the name of the entire court, the doctrine that the judges have the power to declare an act of Congress null and void, when in their opinion it violates the Constitution. This power was not expressly conferred on the court by the Constitution. Although many able men have held that the judicial branch of government enjoyed it, the principle was not positively established until 1803 by Marshall's ruling in this case. End of quote. Jefferson, shocked, bluntly expressed his concern to his old friend Judge Spencer Roane, the son-in-law of Patrick Henry and a justice on the Virginia Supreme Court. If this opinion be sound, Jefferson wrote, then indeed is our Constitution a complete felo de se, legally a suicide. For intending to establish 3 departments, coordinate and independent, that they might each check and balance one another, this decision has given, according to this opinion, to one of them alone the right to prescribe rules for the government of the others, and to that one, too, which is unelected by and independent of the nation. Jefferson continued in full fury. The Constitution on this hypothesis is a mere thing of wax in the hands of the judiciary, which they may twist and shape into any form they please. It should be remembered as an axiom of eternal truth in politics that whatever power in any government is independent is absolute also. In theory only at first, while the spirit of the people is up, but in practice, as fast as that relaxes. Independence can be trusted nowhere but with the people in mass. They are inherently independent of all but moral law. My construction of the Constitution is very different from that you quote. It is that each department is truly independent of the others and has an equal right to decide for itself what is the meaning of the Constitution in the cases submitted to its action, and especially where it is to act ultimately and without appeal. A judiciary independent of a king or executive alone is a good thing, but independent of the will of the nation is a solecism, a blunder, at least in a Republican government. In his decision putting the Supreme Court above the elected officials, the legislature and the president, John Marshall was echoing Hamilton's Federalist mistrust of any form of government constrained solely by those elected by the people. Kings had faced challenges, the Federalists argued, and fought back because as kings they could force decisions without having to wait for a consensus of the people. This powerful federal judiciary, only partially answerable to the people, the Federalists believed, was essential to the survival of the nation.
As Hamilton wrote in the Federalist Papers in number 23 about whether there should be constraints in the Constitution that would prevent the U.S. government from operating outside the will of its people. Quote, these constitutional powers ought to exist without limitation because it is impossible to foresee or define the extent and variety of national exigencies or the correspondent extent and variety of the means by which may be necessary to satisfy them. The circumstances that endanger the safety of nations are infinite, and for this reason, no constitutional shackles can wisely be imposed on the power to which the care of it is committed. Hamilton's argument is essentially what was said by the Bush administration lawyers who argued in their legal briefs for massive increases in presidential powers post 9/11. Madison, as an ally of Jefferson, rebutted Hamilton's worldview, perhaps most eloquently in the Federalist Papers number 39, when he wrote, it is essential to such a government that it be derived from the great body of society, not from an inconsiderable proportion or a favored class of it. Otherwise, a handful of tyrannical nobles exercising their oppressions by a delegation of their powers might aspire to the rank of republicans and claim for their government the honorable title of republic. Jefferson further elaborated his arguments for three independent and equal in power branches of government, as well in numerous writings during the 1780s as the Constitution was being formed. But that was then, and this was 1803. The deed was done by Marshall, and the Federalists had won. That said, there is no doubt that Marshall, like Hamilton, believed he was doing the best thing for the nation, that he had served as a soldier during the Revolutionary War. In the 1819 McCulloch versus Maryland decision, for example, he referenced government deriving all its power from and by the people. Anyway, the book is Unequal Protection.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back to the second hour of our program. On the line with me, Dr. Stephen Stosny, PhD, founder of Compassion Power, author of several books. His latest, Soar Above, How to Use the Most Profound Part of Your Brain Under Any Kind of Stress. CompassionPower.com is his website. Dr. Stosny, am I correctly pronouncing your name?
You are very correct.
Okay, great. So I saw this article, Why We Are a Nervous Nation, PTSD, post-Trump, post-traumatic stress disorder explained?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me about this.
Well, we did a national survey. It was done by the Radius Global Market Research and commissioned by care-.com. And that survey found that since the election, 59% of the people, and it's a national survey, were reporting more anxiety. And half of them are looking for ways to cope, going to doctors, support groups, that kind of thing. The symptoms are typical of anxiety, what people reported on this survey. That's nervousness, sleep disturbance, arguing with partners, resentment, smoking and drinking more, having less sex, and eating unhealthily.
So these are the consequences of people having anxiety around Donald Trump being elected president? I mean, is it that simple? Or the Republican Party taking over the entire, all three branches of our federal government? Is that what's driving this?
I'm not sure if it's that specifically attached to issues so much as uncertainty. This president has a very bold, aggressive leadership style, whether you like him or not. He's Twitter happy. Remember when we used to worry about trigger happy presidents?
Right.
But Twitter is by nature impulsive. And all of that is amplified by a pervasive social media. And another thing about anxiety is it's contagious. If you're around a nervous person, you're going to get nervous. So all of that's kind of a perfect storm for the rise in anxiety, as this poll is showing.
So you are a psychotherapist. What should we do about this?
Well, the greatest antidote for anxiety is connection. Connect to your family. See, I deal mostly with couples, and what's alarming to me is that couples blame each other for anxiety that comes from outside. So you might be listening to the news on your drive home, and it's a little bit upsetting to you, and then you're going to take it out on your wife or husband when you get there. That you can't do. You've got to connect, value the people you value more, value your children, feel protective of them. And the one of the negative things about anxiety is the powerlessness of it. So whatever you stand for, lobby Congress, demonstrate, write letters, but and this is important, focus on what you're for rather than what you're against. What you're for gives conviction, which regulates anxiety. What you're against actually raises anxiety.
Yeah, excellent stuff. To what we're seeing this grassroots explosion in both parties, largely in the Republican Party with the election of Barack Obama, now largely in the Democratic Party with the election of Donald Trump, and all these groups popping up, and membership groups, and people are having. It used to just, on the left, it used to just be kind of drinking liberally, everything else was online, moveon.org, et cetera. And now you've got all these groups that are doing house parties and connections and Our Revolution and people getting together and all this stuff. Is this people engaging in, perhaps unintentionally, in highly therapeutic behavior?
I think they're being driven by the anxiety, and humans, when they're anxious, tend to try to connect. So it's not surprising that you're going to see a proliferation of them.
Yeah, it's remarkable stuff. Dr. Stephen Stosny, the founder of Compassion Power, the author of several books, Soar Above, How to Use the Most Profound Parts of Your Brain Under Any Kind of Stress. CompassionPower.com is the website. And where can people find your article about Nervous Nation?
It's at care-.com.
Care-.com. CAREDASH.com. Yes. Okay, great. Dr. Stosny, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Great speaking with you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Let's see here. Jeff in Langston, Alabama. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I think that if Bernie would have ran as an independent, he would have won. I'm saying this because after watching what France did, neither one of the major parties won. And nobody, likes the liberal celebrity of the left, which was Hillary Clinton. And, in Alabama, there's a lot of conservatives here. But when I talk to them, they're tired of all these people going to Washington and getting rich, too. We have to be a party of the middle class.
Well, but the problem, Jeff, I absolutely agree. And this is why I keep saying the Democratic Party, and it's happening, by the way. This is the good news. It's actually happening. And Tom Perez is driving that train in that direction, a very positive direction. But the Democratic Party needs to, fundamentally, foundationally, aggressively, and loudly embrace its FDR roots, its modern era roots. It's the last century. But I totally disagree that if Bernie had run as an independent, he would have won, because being a third-party candidate in the United States is almost impossible. The closest anybody got to that was Ross Perot in 1992.
Let me tell you, my two youngest daughters finally got involved in politics, and they were feeling the burn. They got out and they organized. One lives in Texas, the other in Georgia. And they got out and they were organizing and voting, getting their friends to register to vote. And then when the election was stolen from them, they dropped out. They didn't care. They went to what 20-year-olds do. They partied.
Well, a lot of people did.
And I go to the Democratic Party here, and they're all old people. They're nothing but old people. And I look at Bernie. He had young people. President Obama had young people. Trump had young people. We need to think only of the American working class, and that's it. Everything else would be taken care of.
I agree.
Rich would get their hair. The poor gets more generosity if we had a decent middle class. Because the Republicans, who I consider the party of lies and the party of stupid, will get their way with their lies. I read the Bible every day, and everything talks about lying people. You know, when they get in a corner, they'll lie.
Yeah. It's just there is you know, the Democratic Party represents $1 billion infrastructure that neither Bernie nor anybody else could have replicated quickly. Ross Perot was able to do it because he was a billionaire. I mean, he put hundreds of, I don't know how much money he put in, but he put millions of dollars of his own money into his campaign. And NAFTA was a highly contentious issue at that time. And you know, Perot got almost 20% of the vote just on that one single issue. And, you know, in retrospect, I think, you know, history shows that Perot was right. But you know, anyhow, Jeff, I'm going to move along. We'll just have to agree to disagree about third parties. Stephanie in Charleston, West Virginia. Hey, Stephanie, what's up?
Hey, I wanted to talk a little bit about our governor here, Jim Justice. I know that it seems like every day when I turn on the news, I hear about Trump's corruption and how he's using the White House to get rich. And it's not just him. I mean, our governor here, we're in the middle of a budget crisis again. Mm-hmm. And his plan is to get richer. He owns the Greenbrier Resort and Hotel. He owns agriculture, timber, coal being the biggest one. And that's what he wants to put the money towards. He wants to use the budget for advertising for tourism. He wants to tier the coal severance tax. And, you know, we're struggling. We can barely survive here. And all he's worried about is making himself richer.
Well, is it possible that his business interests actually overlap with the major economic interests of West Virginia, and therefore if he's successful, West Virginia is successful? I'm guessing that's his sales pitch.
Yeah, that's the sales pitch. And but I asked him during a town hall, what about raising the minimum wage to $15? I said, wouldn't that create revenue? It would make more businesses, make the people happier, more jobs. And he said, no. I mean, he agreed it would bring him revenue, and he still shot it down. He shot down legalizing recreational marijuana, which would bring in another $250 million into the state.
Oh, that would bring in a fortune. Plus, it would deal with the opiate crisis that West Virginia is having. Every state that has recreationally decriminalized marijuana has seen a drop in opiate deaths, overdoses. Because
and that would be huge for us. And he shot that down too. He can't give us a real.
Is he a Democrat or a Republican?
Democrat. Huh. And that's why we've lost so much hope in the Democratic Party, because when you've got people like him and Joe Manchin, I mean, our local government has pretty much gone Republican. Yeah,
it's really sad. It's really sad. I saw Joe last night, in fact, oddly enough. But yeah, it's. Stephanie, thanks for the heads up. I was not that familiar with the situation at that level. You know, the governor's situation there in West Virginia. I'm saddened to hear it. But thanks for the heads up on that. I appreciate the call. We'll be back. We're coming up on, 16 minutes past the hour, I think? Stick around. 17 minutes. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Margot in St. Augustine, Florida. Hey, Margot, what's on your mind today?
I am a first-time caller and a very, very idolizing of your brain. I don't know how you remember the stuff you do.
Bless you, Margot.
That's not what I call the back.
Thank you.
I just know you blush when you get compliments, so I like to see you blush.
Thank you.
I was really shaken when I heard Ivanka Trump got 3 patents from China just around the time when the Chinese were meeting with her for her handbags.
Oh, it was the same day.
And I just couldn't understand it.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump has been promoting United States, and she has the audacity to go there and get the patents.
Well,
and
there's
a list of 15 things that I'd like to tell you, but I can't, so I picked that one.
Well, that may be defensible. I mean, I think the fact that she continues to have her products manufactured in countries that pay as little as $1 an hour and that have some pretty scandalous stuff, and you can find these headlines. There's been a number of them in the last 2 or 3 days about Ivanka Trump's business practices and the exploitation of foreign labor. I think that's the real scandal. Her applying for those trademarks could just be trying to protect her brand. I mean, now that her dad is president, her brand is, truly a global brand. And so if I was her business advisor, I would say, go to every country on earth and get your trademarks laid down so that nobody can pop up and say, hi, I'm manufacturing Ivanka Trump handbags, and I own the trademark to it, when you're not Ivanka Trump. So it may have been a defensive move. What we don't know is whether that was the case. If it was a defensive move, it was entirely legitimate and appropriate. If, on the other hand, it was setting it up so that after Daddy leaves the White House, we can make a fortune in China with Trump handbags because the name is so big, or even right now we can make a fortune with Trump handbags, and she's just pretending not to know about it because she's got this firewall of some kind or not. I don't know, because she's not taking a paycheck. So I don't think that the emoluments issues and all self-dealing applies to her. But it might not be as bad as it looks, the trademarks. But what is even worse than it looks, frankly, is the fact that her father's running around the country saying we're going to bring home American jobs when he's making his ties in wherever, Singapore or Malaysia or something like that. He's making his cufflinks virtually all of his products are made in either Asia or Central America. And he's not bringing home his own products for manufacturing. And, he could do that. And Ivanka could do that. And they're not. And that, the old phrase, actions speak louder than words. I think that's a pretty big deal, Margot. And that would be where I would put the focus of my attention. What do you think?
Thank you.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
above my head what you're talking about.
Okay. Thank you, Margot. I appreciate the call. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV there in St. Augustine. St. Augustine, my father-in-law is buried in St. Augustine. He lived there for a number of years. It's a beautiful, beautiful town. We went down there for the funeral, and it's, we visited him a number of times. He lived right down by the beach. What a great place. Anyhow, we'll be right back with more of your calls right after this. Stick with it.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's a bunch of other news that I wanted to share with you, and then we'll get back to your phone calls here. But just this, the whole Ann Coulter thing. Ann Coulter is a hustler. I mean, and I don't say that to diminish her. She's a very good hustler. She's got a brand. It's her name. And she's made a lot of money selling books and giving speeches and basically being who she is. and she is milking this Berkeley thing for all it's worth. And let's just acknowledge that. But the people at the University of California at Berkeley are, I think, legitimately concerned about things like what I'm about to tell you. This is a story that was in yesterday's Guardian and by the Guardian staff. The headline, couple charged in shooting of protester at Milo Yiannopoulos event in Seattle. Now, Milo, he's a Ann Coulter wannabe, right? He's trying to build his brand to the point where he can become as rich and famous as Ann Coulter by being an aggrieved conservative. I'm a victim conservative. Ann Coulter wears her victimhood like a badge. So does Milo. So Milo shows up in Seattle to give a speech. And of course, there's a bunch of progressives outside demonstrating against him. And this couple, Elizabeth Hokoana and Mark Hokoana, and her husband, he's 34, she's 29. This couple shot this guy named Joshua Dukes, 34, in the stomach at the protest. He was one of the protesters. So who are the couple? Well, in the charging papers, the King County, and this was outdoors, this was outside the auditorium. In the charging papers, King County prosecutor, I'm reading from the Guardian, but King County prosecutors say this shooting was not an impulsive act done in a moment of fear. Instead, the two went to the campus event with the intent, this is from the prosecutors, the police reports. The two went to the campus event with the intent to provoke altercations with protesters who they knew would also be at this controversial event. The senior deputy prosecuting attorney, Mary Barbosa, said, she added, they created a situation designed to allow Elizabeth Hokoana to shoot the victim in the middle of an extremely crowded event under the guise of defending herself or her husband. And then it goes on to say, Mark Hokoana messaged a friend on Facebook the day before Yiannopoulos was scheduled to talk and said he can't wait for tomorrow, according to police officials. In the Facebook message obtained by a search warrant, he wrote, quote, I'm going to the Milo event, and if the snowflakes get out of hand, I'm just going to wade through their ranks and start cracking skulls. This is the guy who shot a protester in the stomach. The protester, the bullet went in through his abdomen and exited his back. 2 months later, he still bears an oozing wound and a long surgical scar. He has lost his gallbladder and half his colon. His liver was severely damaged, his diaphragm pierced. This guy who got shot, his life is going to be shorter, and it's going to be much more difficult as a result of this attempted murder. Simply because he showed up to protest Milo, and these right-wingers, this right-wing couple showed up with a gun to attempt to provoke the protesters. This is the kind of stuff that's being done on the right. This is reminiscent of the brown shirts, the volunteer, pro-fascism, the volunteer fascists who would show up at Nazi gatherings and kick the bejesus out of the protesters. It happened in Italy. It happened in Spain. It happened in Germany. It happened in Chile. It happened in Argentina. It's happening now in the United States. So I think, as much as I have in the past, well, specifically yesterday, talked about the importance of, free speech and diversity and all that kind of stuff, when this kind of thing is going on, we've got to pay attention.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Yesterday, 1,000 people took over the Heritage Foundation in a protest. Did you see that on the network news? 1,000 people?
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. And this is from page 180. The subhead is, the title is What We Need to Remember. The chapter title, the subhead is The Slavery, Losing Your Freedom of Civilization. In 1861, Mark Twain rode the railroad and overland stage across much of the United States, documenting his journey in a book, Roughing It. published in 1871. During a stagecoach ride near the Great Salt Lake, he encountered a group of the Shoshone-speaking Native Americans called the Goswit, often referred to then by whites as the Digger Indians. Twain considered them, quote, the wretchedest type of mankind I have ever seen, end quote, and wrote, quote, they produce nothing at all. They have no villages, no gatherings together into strictly defined tribal communities, a people whose only shelter is a rag cast on a bush to keep off a portion of the snow, and yet who inhabit one of the most rocky, wintry, repulsive wastes that our country or any other man can exhibit. The Bushmen and the Gashoots are manifestly descended from the self-same gorilla or kangaroo or Norway rat, whichever animal Adam the Darwinians trace them to, end of quote. Even to this day, many people who have not bothered to study the Shoshone or other hunter-gatherer people imagine them in much of the same way Mark Twain did. Books and movies over the years have implied that their lives must be a continuous wretched struggle to find food from day to day, and that their cultures and religions hardly qualify as either. In that belief, however, Twain and many modern people are wrong. If the highest goal of contemporary civilization is to have leisure time, free from the demands of providing for food and shelter, so that one may then contemplate the great mysteries of life, then the Shoshone had achieved the pinnacle of success. Our culture teaches that civilizations like city-states come about as a result of technological innovation, such as agriculture, giving people more free time. With this free time, the story goes, they produce art, literature, religion, and explore the cosmos. Primitive cultures don't have these things because they don't have the time for them. In fact, these represent two of our most deadly myths. Leisure time. Every empirical study of both historic and contemporary cultures finds that the more complex and hierarchical a culture is, the harder the people in it must work and the more frantic their lives are. Just look at how many hours a week the average middle management executive works, about 60. And how many families have two 40-hour-per-week workers devoting 80 hours a week to paying the mortgage and feeding the family. Only a very small class of people within the city-state enjoys the leisure time state of freedom, its economic and political rulers. And because the ruling class is not producing food, those who are food producers must spend extra time making food for those who are not. The Shoshone require the same average 2,000 calories of food energy every day as do any other humans. However, they expend on average only 2 hours a day to acquire it, because they were a nomadic people who moved from place to place following their food supply. As the seasons changed and food became scarce in one place, they simply moved to another. If one food wasn't available, they knew where and how to find another. Toronto University professor Richard Lee found that the similarly structured tribal group, the Kung of the Kalahari Desert in Africa, spend less than 15 hours a week, 2 hours a day, attending to gathering food and the other necessities of life. The rest of the time, he said, they played, told stories, and made music. John Yellen of the National Science Foundation found the same to be true of the Hottentots, another hunter-gatherer group in Africa. The Shoshone had an elaborate and meaningful culture and religion. They generally did not suffer from famines or plagues. They had lived comfortably and happily on their land for at least several thousand, perhaps as many as 10,000 years, keeping the land as clean and pure and productive as it could be in that desert and mountain region, living harmoniously with their neighbors. At the time Mark Twain took his ride through their territory, the Shoshone had accomplished, over 1,000 years, a second achievement, which is regularly touted by our leaders as the highest goal of humankind. They had eliminated warfare. There was not even a word for war in their language. The Shoshone lived a tribal life in one of the most desolate parts of North America, with a population density that ranged from one person every 50 square miles to one person every 100 square miles. A typical tribal unit was a single extended family of 5 to 20 people, and they traveled at a leisurely pace across a wide area. On those rare occasions when others, including whites, came to attack them, they simply ran away and hid. The occasions for attack were rare, largely because the Shoshone accumulated no wealth. They had no systems for preserving and storing food, minerals, or anything other than what they could carry. In this regard, they were not poor. Their lives were comfortable, their family interactions meaningful, and their food supply ample. A symbol of this is found in the highest status act a Shoshone could commit in the presence of others, to give them what he had. Generosity is how one achieves social standing among the Shoshone, whereas the accumulation and control of surplus food and possessions were how whites achieved social status. They were called the diggers by whites because they often dug in the ground for roots and food. Whites assumed this implied some sort of agricultural stupidity, but in fact, the Shoshone had a deep and rich knowledge of life in their environment, both above and below the ground. They used a sacred digging stick to extract food, and it was both manufactured and transported with ritual and ceremony. If a stone had to be moved, a different type of stick was used. When a Shoshone looked out at the natural world, she saw a landscape rich with life, both visible and hidden. That life was known to her, called to her, spoke to her, and often guided her. Last Hours of Ancient Thought.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at HartmannReport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. In Grand Rapids, somebody called about this yesterday, and thanks for the call and for, sensitizing me to this. And I went looking for it, and actually somebody tweeted it this morning as well. In Grand Rapids, the police had stopped 5 young black men, or boys, actually, children, not even teenagers yet, and who were just, coming home from an event, from a baseball game, I think, and made them lay down on the ground, with their hands out, and held them at gunpoint. And I mean, this is just like way over the top. Here's a clip of it. You can hear a little bit of this.
Matching. Guys, get on the ground. Keep your hands out. Hey, come over here. Keep your hands where I can see them and get on the ground. Get on the ground. Get on the ground.
These are just kids in their own neighborhood, coming home. And if you're looking at the video, you're seeing, the cop's camera, and he's got the gun pointed right at them. Like 12-year-olds represent a mortal threat to him. Oh yeah, they're black.
Okay, ma'am, can you go back in your house for me?
These kids are crying. They're freaked out. They're frightened.
Ma'am, go back in your house.
This is just so.
Go back in your house now.
This is just so wrong. Are the kids crying?
He just happens to be possibly in the wrong.
I mean, they're just totally freaked.
Matching the clothing these kids have. Okay? Like you said, your son is
white cops in a black neighborhood. So, I guess we can wrap that. Just an FYI, and then at the same time, I look at my Twitter feed and I get a tweet from Derek Keith. He says, "Tom, I'm so sick and tired of so-called white Dems saying whether or not black Dems should take speaking fees from any group. Obama is," and then presumably there's a follow-up message which I haven't gotten to. And then there's Daniel Fee tweeted me, "The far left is still out of touch with black voters. This week, the internet was set ablaze with hot takes relating to former President Obama's decision to get paid to speak at a healthcare rally or a healthcare event put on by this investment bank." It's interesting, is my, and the question, and the what Daniel said, here's a good article, Bernie and many of his supporters are letting their white privilege show. My point was that if you're looking at a role model for a Democratic president, after post-presidency, I think Jimmy Carter should be an icon. He gave no paid speeches. He went out and built homes for people. He created the Carter Institute and worked for peace all around the world. Now, I know President Obama is going to be doing something very much like that. But I will continue to say, I don't think this has anything to do with white or black. And I realize that that's, typically a classic white privilege, even sometimes racist statement. But I really, he just got a $65 million book deal. He was a multimillionaire to begin with from his previous book deals. He had, 8 years of a $400,000 a year job with room and board. And he doesn't need the $400,000. And I don't think, whether he's white or black, and I don't think it's a good idea for
the guy who is arguably the head of the Democratic Party, or certainly one of the Democratic Party's elders, to be getting into bed economically, financially, with banksters. So I'll take your calls on this. Does that make me, a racist, or am I missing something here? I don't see what this has to do with race. Anyhow, Katie in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Katie, what's on your mind?
Hi. I suggest you go to look at the Albuquerque Journal front page yesterday, an article how the Albuquerque Police Department on its Facebook page is criticizing judges and the news media for decisions that are made without any, background information, stories that are not accurate, and they're arousing people to write to the Albuquerque Facebook page and say, judges are vermin. Hopefully their families will be attacked next. And this is just more of this fascist, but it's a higher, newer level. And the Albuquerque police chief said to an innkeeper's luncheon last week that he said, if it looks like I'm going after judges unfairly, no, not unfairly, did not say that. If it looks like I'm going after judges, well, that's true. I'm going after judges.
Wow. That is.
I suggest you take a look at that article. It's much more complete than what I'm telling you.
I'll check it out. Katie, thanks for the heads up on that. Thank you for the call. David in Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, David, what's up? I think we lost David. Robert in Houston, Texas. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind?
Hi. Yeah, I heard you say much earlier in the show about how we have to abandon the old methods of politics and get back to democratic grassroots populist politics.
Which is actually reclaiming the old method of politics.
Right. What I want to point out is that the fact that in the early 90s, when we were coming off the Reagan-Bush years, the big money politics was necessary because you had to buy TV commercials to get your negative on the other guy and your positives out.
Right, and this is the rationale that Al Fromm came up with for the DLC, and I think that at the time it made a lot of sense. I mean, at the time I was not bothered by it.
Not now.
Yeah, but not now.
It has proved that you can do it another way using social media, and so we can abandon these ties to have big money people fund the campaign, and we can go to a new model, which is to have the people fund the campaign, and that way we can speak to the issues that people care about and not just patronize the big money donors.
Yeah, I don't entirely.
I think it's possible to do that.
Yeah, I don't entirely agree with that because it really depends on the state. And I think in some ways Bernie was an anomaly, although there are a number of candidates who have been essentially repeating what he did. But in a large state like California or New York, it's really difficult to campaign statewide without a lot of television advertising. And that takes money. Right. And there's just no way around that. Illinois, I mean, you take any of these states that have major cities and then large rural areas or multiple cities in them, and it's tough. And so the solution in my mind is not to say, we're going to or not going to take large donor money. The solution in my mind is to fix the law. And that means we have to get around the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court, I mean, we actually fixed this law in 1973 and 74 after the Nixon scandals. We passed legislation that made it very, very difficult for billionaires and large corporations to corrupt politicians, because it had so clearly happened with Nixon. And the Supreme Court struck those laws down in 76 and 78 with the Buckley decision and the Bellotti decision, and then amplified that in 2010 with Citizens United. And so Congress can, theoretically anyway, Article 3, Section 2, you can read it yourself, of the Constitution. Congress can theoretically overturn a Supreme Court decision, although they've never done it to the best of my knowledge. But they can do it by virtue of a constitutional amendment. And that is, in my opinion, what we need. We need a constitutional amendment that says money is not speech and corporations are not people. And we need it now. Robert, thanks a lot for the call. Dwayne in Lincolnville, Kansas. Hey, Dwayne, what's on your mind?
Yes. I was listening to what you said, and I just totally got distracted. Trump, the Republicans are saying that this tax break will stimulate the economy, but like it did in the 80s. Well, what stimulated the economy in the 80s was the computer
revolution.
Yeah, that, and so they're trying to take credit for that when that is not.
Well, people also forget that Reagan had one of the deepest recessions during his presidency, during the 80s, since the Great Depression, and he had the largest stock market drop since the Great Depression. In fact, people were freaked; they thought this was it, and it only lasted a short time. But Reagan got through, and also the 80s were the tail end of that post-war boom. And it wasn't until the middle of his presidency that Reagan was actually able to drop that top tax rate. And then we saw the consequences of that show up in the George Herbert Walker Bush administration when the economy really got soft, which did not help him get reelected. So it's a large part of why he didn't get reelected. And Bill Clinton campaigned on his New Covenant speech, which was basically, I will be FDR. And, I reprinted the speech in my book, Threshold, and it's easy to Google, for that matter, Bill Clinton's New Covenant speech. That's what he campaigned on in '92. And it's very progressive. It was a very progressive position. So, it's I think that America has always been wanting to go back to FDR. FDR is the only guy who ever was elected 4 times president of the United States. Dwayne, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls, and we're going to check in with Talk Media News in a few minutes, too. And welcome back. Ted in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Hey, Ted, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Love your show.
Thank you.
I'll tell you what, there's something about this Affordable Care Act. If they do away with that, not many vets know that we're under the ACA.
Right.
And they can do whatever they want to do. I mean, they could cut the benefits. And the only I saw it on CNN, somebody mentioned it, and that was it. But it's like the best kept secret.
Yeah, this is the stuff that extends beyond the VA system itself. Is part of the Affordable Care Act for veterans. You're right.
Right.
So yeah, good point, Ted. That's what you wanted to say.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Okay.
Because probably a lot of vets aren't even aware of it. I don't know because there's no publicity about it.
Yeah, you're right, and I need to mention it more often. Ted, thanks for the heads up on that. I appreciate it. Thanks for bringing it up. Wayne in Charleston, West Virginia. Hey, Wayne, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to make a statement, quick one, and kind of got a subject change because listening to you and that discussion about Obama and the money, that's why Hillary Clinton didn't get elected. That's
my point.
One of the big reasons was because she was taking money from the big people providing it.
My point. Yep.
So it has nothing to do with white privilege on your part. You're good, and you stick to your guns.
Well, I was just surprised to see these so many people talk. It's not so many. Two people on Twitter.
A lot of people that think about nothing but money. So they look at that and figure he needs to take more money. He doesn't need it.
Yeah.
That lady that called you earlier, Stephanie, I just wanted her to know this Governor Jim Justice here did the exact opposite that Donald Trump did. He was a Republican and switched to Democratic Party so he could get nominated over here.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, Troy was telling me he's the only billionaire in West Virginia.
I don't know about that, but he owes the state $15 million, and the only thing he thinks about is taxing the people.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So he's a dino. He's a Democrat in name only, basically.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Wayne, thanks a lot for that. Time?
Okay.
A little more in a minute. Great. Lowell in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Lowell, we got a minute. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to let you know about I have a great shout out for Representative John Garamendi.
Okay.
I think it's Garamendi.
Garamendi's, yeah.
He was channeling the kind of progressive future. He was talking about the bridge built in San Francisco was built with Chinese steels, and he was outlaying how many
the bridge
jobs
was actually built in China. They brought it over in pieces.
Yeah, and he was outlining how many jobs in China that created, and then he pointed to the bridge in New York and how many jobs that created in America. So, we're starting to get more and more representatives. So I'm hoping maybe someday you can get Representative Garamendi.
Garamendi's, yeah. Yeah, he's been on the program before. He's a good guy. This, what's just amazing to me, Lowell, is that this has always been a Democratic issue. Opposing so-called free trade, opposing corporatist trade. It has always been a Democratic issue. And Donald Trump seized on it and ran as a Democrat in the Republican primary and won, and then ran largely as a Democrat in the general election and won, or at least won the Electoral College, and largely on that issue. And it just makes me crazy that the Democrats are not just louder and louder and louder about it. Lowell, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And looks like our reporter today for Talk Media News had a family emergency. So I'm going to take your calls, which is great fun anyway. Denise in Chicago. Hey, Denise, what's up?
Hey, Tom. You have to know I respect you and just love your call. I learned so much from you. But listening to the conversation about President Obama taking $400,000 to me, and I don't get it. I think he has every right in a capitalist country to go out and be paid for something that he does.
Of course he does.
Granted, okay, now I'm
the question is, what kind of damage will it do to the Democratic Party? How much is this going to dishearten young people who view him as a role model and an ideal to deliver the message that, hey, if you get into politics afterwards, you can get rich.
But Tom, isn't the conversation about the money that Mr. Trump has made?
Actually, let me qualify that. It's not afterwards you can get rich, because afterwards he got a $65 million book deal, and I think that's just great. It's afterwards you can get rich by getting into bed with the same bankers that you never sent to jail, even though they destroyed the economy and committed literally crimes for which they were fined millions to billions of dollars. Never went to jail.
Okay. Thank you for telling me that. But what about Mr. Trump, who was paid millions of dollars before he became president, and the conflict of interest in the money that he's making? I accept your...
It's obvious and terrible, Denise, but,
Yeah. So why are we focusing the question on Obama and use that and shift that topic and then move it to go after Trump?
Because it's meta for the future of the Democratic Party. I don't think that if the senior officials of the Democratic Party are conspicuously getting into bed with bankers, that you're going to have that grassroots groundswell. And I'm not just talking millennials here. I don't think that you're going to have that grassroots groundswell of people wanting to get into the Democratic Party, to be local activists, to show up and vote, to participate. I think that that kind of thing actually depresses the vote. I think that that was one of the reasons that Hillary Clinton did not win the election. Yes, she got 3 million more votes, but she did not win the Electoral College. I think it's one of the and it's something that was used against her. It was used against her by Bernie. It was used against her by Donald Trump. Which is like hypocrisy at a senior level, but still, it was, and it is in my opinion, it's unseemly. But I mean, he's entitled to do whatever he wants. I'm not concerned, frankly, about what this is going to do to Barack Obama's legacy. That's in his hands, and he's entitled to shape and form that however he wants. But I am concerned that as the former president, and we don't have a Democratic president right now, so arguably he's the most senior Democrat we have, that you know, hey, banksters, give me 400 grand when I'm already a multimillionaire. It doesn't seem to me like it's going to help the party. And I was hoping that in his post-presidency, he would be working to help not only the world, which I believe he's going to be doing with his Obama Foundation, but also the Democratic Party. I think this hurts the party. That's all. That's it. That's what I'm saying.
Well, thank you. You enlightened me.
Okay.
In many ways.
Thank you, Denise. And I don't see what this has to do with race. Wub in Oxnard, California. Am I saying your name right? W-U-B? Wub?
Hello, Tom. Thanks so much for taking the call.
Sure.
You brought up the subject earlier about the shooting at Seattle in University of Washington Red Square campus.
Right.
And I just wanted to briefly respond to some of the things you said, and we're grateful for you bringing it up because your listeners need to know this is one of the most important actions that happened on the inauguration day. I mean, there were terrific things that happened in Washington, D.C., but in Seattle, many people showed up to block the gates of Milo's entrance for supporters. They successfully did so for many, but they were aided and abetted by a police force that was just out of control. They allowed the most egregious violence. And I personally saw the person who was charged going from protester to protester, or from defender to defender, spraying him in the face with pepper spray.
Wow.
A woman next to me said to the UW police, "Hey, look at that woman. She's assaulting people left and right. What are you guys going to do about it?" And they said, "You know, we can't prove it's her." I saw that. I saw the UW police and with the Seattle police just completely fail in its in its mission to protect the local populace. Wow. Not only that, the events since then have just been an absolute storm of misinformation and bad information. He was outed locally. The person shot was actually a defender from the IWW, the International Workers of the World
the Wobblies
Union. Yeah, he was on the General Defense Council, right? You know, the protectors, the people. He was specifically went there to de-escalate violence during a protest and was shot by these people. Okay, so what's happened since then is he was outed by the local Seattle Times in a way that he did not want. He later gave an interview to the Guardian under his real name. He's done a lot of organizing here locally in his own community.
Let me ask you a question, Wub. If and this happened on inaugural day, I didn't somehow I missed that in the article. If on inaugural day a Trump supporter had been shot by a Hillary voter or a Democrat, what do you think would have happened in the news media?
Would have been front page news all around the world. I think that it would have been a persecution of the left, like much worse than is going on now. But
and it would have been wall to wall for a week.
The media narrative is already bad, Tom. It would be much worse, but it's still there doesn't seem to be a particular benefit for anyone right now to continue this narrative that the left is simply the cause of all the violence. What's happened is since then, because this was before Berkeley. And at Berkeley emerged this real gladiator culture. These far right guardians of the wannabe crusaders who show up with shields and are real intent on violence. And that's what we're putting up with at protests like the UW Milo protest. Is that I saw a crowd of people show up, extremely violent, many of whom were drunk, many of whom were just intent on pushing their way through a mass of people blocking the gate.
Amazing. Well, we're out of time. Thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from We the People. This is an illustrated book. It's, illustrated kind of like a comic book. It's very, very readable, but it's serious stuff. This is from page 10. War is the Enemy is the chapter. George Orwell's idea in his novel 1984 that perpetual war was a masterful technique for repressing the masses was not new. On April 20th, 1795, James Madison, who helped shepherd through the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and would become President of the United States in the following decade, wrote, "Of all the enemies to public liberty, war is perhaps the most to be dreaded because it comprises and develops the germ of every other. War is the parent of armies, and from these proceed debts and taxes. And armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few." Reflecting on war's impact on the presidency, Madison continued his letter about the dangerous and intoxicating powers of war. In war, too, the discretionary power of the presidency is extended. Its influence in dealing out offices, favors, and emoluments, profits, is multiplied, and all the means of seducing the minds are added to those of subduing the force of the people. The same malignant aspect in republicanism may be traced in the inequality of fortunes and the opportunities of fraud growing out of a state of war, and in the degeneracy of manners and morals engendered by both. No nation, Madison concluded, could preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare. Once the Revolutionary War was over and the Constitution had been worked out and presented to the states for ratification, Thomas Jefferson turned his attention to what he and Madison felt was a terrible inadequacy in the new Constitution. It didn't explicitly stipulate the natural rights of the new nation's citizens, and it didn't protect against the rise of new commercial monopolies like the East India Company, which had once dominated life in the colonies and used the British Army as its own private army. On December 20th, 1787, Jefferson wrote to James Madison about his concerns regarding the Constitution. He said bluntly that it was deficient in several areas. Quote, "I will now tell you what I do not like. First, the omission of a Bill of Rights, providing clearly and without the aid of sophism for freedom of religion, freedom of the press, protection against standing armies, restriction of commercial monopolies, the eternal and unremitting force of the habeas corpus laws, and trials by jury in all manners of fact triable by the laws of the land and not by the laws of nations." When the United States was first declared independent in 1776, its founders knew humans had previously faced tyranny in the form of despotic kings and inquisitional churches. The Bill of Rights firmly declared that no church could ever again control a democratic government. And the Declaration of Independence made it clear right from the beginning that when citizens are burdened by, quote, a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. Thus, the founders and the framers disposed of despotism by church or state, guaranteeing the absolute and inviolable rights of a nation's citizens to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But there was a third entity that Thomas Jefferson and others worried may also one day rise to seize control of the government and enslave the people. James Madison wrote, "There is an evil which ought to be guarded against in the indefinite accumulation of property from the capacity of holding it in perpetuity by corporations. The power of all corporations ought to be limited in this respect. Their growing wealth acquired by them never fails to be a source of abuses." In 1787,
Jefferson proposed an additional amendment to the Bill of Rights to restrain corporations, calling for a constitutional amendment to, quote, ban monopolies in commerce, although it failed under the Federalist opposition of the Hamilton-Adams faction. In arguing for a ban on commercial monopolies, the founders, who had just fought a war of independence against both Britain and the world's largest transnational corporation, the East India Company, whose tea they'd thrown into Boston Harbor, knew the danger of corporations becoming so powerful they could influence government the way the East India Company had persuaded England for a tax reduction and free trade agreement that came to be known as the Tea Act of 1773. But it's not just Madison and Jefferson's remarkable foresight that's warning us about war. More recent presidents have also noted the danger of a corporate usurpation of democracy, particularly when fed by the bloody meat of war. As he was leaving office in 1961, President Dwight Eisenhower looked back over his years as president, as general, as supreme commander of the Allied forces in France during World War II, and noted that the Cold War had brought a new Orwellian type of war to the American landscape, a perpetual war supported by a perpetual war industry. It was the confluence of the two things that Jefferson had warned against and had tried to ban in his first proposed version of the Bill of Rights. In a nationally televised speech, Eisenhower spoke in sobering terms about this. He said, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved, and so is the structure of our very society. He was talking about the military-industrial complex. It continues from there. The book is We the People.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, I mentioned this in the middle of the last hour, but I think it deserves more than just a mention. Joshua Eaton, writing on yesterday's Center for American Progress's blog, Think Progress, actually it was day before yesterday, the headline, Protesters Storm Heritage Foundation Building to Call for a Budget for the People. Now, again, if right-wingers, if a group of right-wing whatevers, protesters had stormed a left-wing think tank here in Washington, D.C., and 1,000 right-wingers and occupied it for an hour, it would be national news. But the media basically only reports on what the right is doing. Yesterday you had a bunch of senators and members of Congress introducing legislation to over an 8-year period raise the minimum wage in the United States up to $20 or $15 an hour, and no mention. It's invisible. It didn't happen. That was those lefties. But Ann Coulter decides she's not going to speak in Berkeley. Oh, that gets reported. That's important. So anyhow, the article on Tuesday, organizers and activists with the People's Action Coalition took to the White House and the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, to protest proposed budget cuts they say will have devastating impacts on the environment, the poor, and communities of color. An energetic crowd of around 1,000 people gathered between Lafayette Park and the White House. It's like 2 blocks from where I am right now, on a gray, drizzly morning in the district, to chant, drum, and listen to speeches and people in the front lines of budget cuts. And then, then they got in buses. Soon, Park Police pushed the crowd back into Lafayette Park. As officers led the 12 protesters to a waiting, they arrested 12 people. After the arrest, protesters piled into yellow school buses on the backside of the park for a second secret action. As they took off and people passed a hat to tip the drivers, organizers announced their target, the Heritage Foundation. The buses parked a few blocks from Heritage's Capitol Hill offices. Protesters formed a fast, silent march to the conservative think tank. Once the towering concrete and glass office building was in sight, 2 organizers held the doors as protesters flooded into the lobby and began chanting. Organizers asked for an in-person or even phone meeting with Heritage Foundation President Jim DeMint. They said, but were told he was unavailable. They held the space for nearly half an hour. My apologies, I thought it was an hour. For nearly half an hour, chanting, drumming, and making speeches before flooding back out of the building to chants of "We'll be back." And then they started giving speeches outside and stuff like that. The Heritage Foundation, you know, the front group for big corporations in the United States. So did any of the big corporations who own the media tell you about this? No. Somehow that didn't happen. Did I do it right, Chris? Close enough. Okay. Yeah. Chris is my voice this afternoon. Our video guy. Anyhow, another story. There's a couple other stories that I wanted to share with you. Just news of the day before I go back to picking up your phone calls here. And these two juxtapose absolutely brilliantly. The first is from April 14th. And I printed this out at the time and thought, you know, someday I'm going to have a slow news day and I will do this story. I've got a stack of about, I don't know, 20, 30 articles sitting around here going back a couple of months that I think are just kind of, you know, they're eternal, right? And I keep waiting for a slow news day to dig into that pile. So yesterday, something happened, which I'm going to tell you about second. Yesterday, there was an article in the Financial Times which perfectly buttresses against this one. So let me share with you the story by Zach Carter in Huffington Post on April 14th, titled "Banks Are Spending Billions to Make Rich People Richer." So you ask the question, well, how do banks make rich people richer? Really simple. Rich people own the majority of stock in this country, including stock in the big banks, right? 92.8% of households making at least $250,000 a year own at least $10,000 in stock, compared with just 19.1% of households earning under $50,000. Households in the top 1% receive an average of 36% of their income from capital gains, which, by the way, are taxed at a maximum 20% rate. So if you can raise your stock price, you make your stockholders richer. So why would banks want to raise their stock prices? Well, the same reason any publicly traded corporation wants to, because of changes in tax law made during the Reagan era, very intently and explicitly, to encourage companies to compensate their senior executives and their CEOs with stock rather than money. If you're the CEO of a big bank and you're sitting on $1 million worth of stock, or $100 million worth of stock is frankly more likely, stock options that you can exercise, and you can jack the stock price up 10%, your $100 million worth of stock just became $110 million worth of stock. You make $10 million like that. And all the people who are stockholders make money. So how do you do that? How do you jack your stock price up really, really quickly? You do it by having your corporation, your bank, buy out of the marketplace shares of your bank and retire them. So instead of 1 million shares being out there, now there's only 900,000 shares being out there. What that does is it just, you know, this is simple supply demand. When you reduce the supply of something, you increase the demand for it. You increase the demand for it, you increase the price of it. So whenever corporations buy back their stock, it does one thing and one thing only. Doesn't help the corporation, doesn't build the corporation, doesn't hire any people, doesn't develop new products, doesn't do anything other than raise the price of the stock. And this article, the CEOs of America's largest banks made a startling announcement last week. The CEO of America's largest bank. His company has too much money and he plans to throw its profits on rich people. He didn't quite put it that way, of course. In his annual letter to shareholders, JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon boasted about his company buying $25 billion of its own stock over the past 5 years and hinted it could buy back another big block of stock this year to further boost share prices. So that's JP Morgan doing that. And of course, you know, Jamie Dimon getting richer and richer and richer as a result of it. It doesn't do anything to help the banking system, does nothing to help the people, does nothing to help anybody except the very, very wealthy. Which leads me to the second story, which is the one that caused me to dig this one out of my pile and say, okay, it's time for this. This was in yesterday's Financial Times. The headline, Credit Suisse launches $4 billion share sale to ease capital fears. Now, this is sort of the opposite, except not quite. Credit Suisse has launched a Swiss franc $4 billion U.S. share sale and abandoned plans to list its Swiss division in an attempt to finally quash capital fears that have dogged the bank since Chief Executive Thom took the helm more than 2 years ago. And shares in Credit Suisse rose 2.5% in early trading. Surprise, surprise. It wasn't the exact same technique, but it was not all that dissimilar. They note the bank's leadership faces a shareholder revolt over executive pay. So what do the executives do? Hey, we can cut our pay. I mean, I don't know if they did this in this case, but if it comes to the next executive in the next stockholders meeting, oh yeah, well, I just cut my pay from $300,000 down to, or from $1 million down to $800,000. No problem, right? Except that I also get $10 million worth of share of stock. So anyway, just wanted to share that stuff with you. This, you get that, and then you look at the so-called tax plan that Trump rolled out yesterday. This was nothing more than puffery. It was pure public relations. It was a single page. That's not a tax plan. That's not anything. That's PR. That's it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And the media totally went for it, bought it all day long, put on all these right-wing guys and all these oh yeah, Reaganism, yeah, it's going to work so well. Great. Welcome back. Gant in Thompson Station, Tennessee. Hey, Gant, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV on DirecTV. What's up?
Hey, thank you, man. I didn't want to change gears on you, but this is kind of based on what one of your earlier callers said. I don't know if you remember, I called you a few weeks ago and mentioned that I'm on kidney dialysis here in Thompson Station, have been for about 8 years.
Uh-huh.
I'm 51, and a lot of people don't know this, that renal patients are covered under Medicare. So I have two insurances, Cigna and Medicare. My issue is I'm watching the Republicans who are desperately trying to run the Affordable Care Act into the ground. And even what I'm concerned about is the aspect of pre-existing conditions and things that they, for some reason, want to remove. I mean, this is just human cruelty. My treatment is very, very expensive. I can't afford it. I'd love to change the price, but I can't. Tom, I don't know what's going to happen to me when they shift all this stuff around. I was wondering if maybe you and some callers could shed light on that. I hate to beat a dead horse into the ground, but this is really starting to bother me, man, because I don't know what I'm going to do when things, when this Affordable Care Act goes away. Thank you. I'm going to shut up and listen.
No, well, again, I don't think it's going to go away. The Republicans are backing off on this. They've got this new deal that the Koch caucus, the so-called Freedom Caucus, has signed off on that lets individual states dial it back. So, in Tennessee, you just got a Republican governor, or am I thinking of Kentucky? You've got a Republican governor in Tennessee.
Republican governor, but there are some Democrats running, and they're starting to look pretty powerful here.
Good. So, I mean, even if the Republicans are successful, it's going to happen at the state level, number one. And number two, I don't think it's going to affect Medicare. It would affect whether Cigna is going to cover their part of your dialysis. And I don't know what percentage of that is covered by Cigna. Do you?
Yeah, the coordination of benefits right now makes Cigna the primary and Medicare is secondary. So Right now it's 80-20, but I think at some point after a coordination period, it goes to Medicare is primary and then Cigna is secondary. And at that time, the cost of my dialysis goes way down.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm guessing that you're not going to be caught in the squeeze here. And I don't think that the Republicans are going to be successful in taking away this health care from people. And if they are going to lose hugely in 2018 and 2020.
Sure. I appreciate your taking my call and giving me your input, and I hope you're right. I'm just scared to death, man. I mean, and being in my condition, I guess you could understand why.
Yeah, absolutely. Set that fear aside and focus on the positive here, Gant. If the time comes, then give us a call and we'll spread the word far and wide. But I don't think that you're going to be in trouble. I really don't. I can't. It's hard. It's hard to imagine that would be successful. And the Republicans and the Democrats still have the power to filibuster in the Senate. Gant, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back.
On April 15th, 1940.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day,
every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Do you know anybody who is an absolute soft drink junkie? You might want to share with them. This story was in the New York Times day before yesterday, 3 days ago, the 24th, April 24th. The headline kind of says it all. Sugary drinks tied to accelerated brain aging. But when you look at the numbers, it's really startling. This was research that was done on 4,000 people over 30 years old. We're not even talking about elderly people over 30. And they used two kinds of tests to evaluate their brain function. One was an MRI looking at the size and blood flow activity in their brains and how much brain tissue they had lost, because aging causes loss of brain tissue. And the second thing that they did was they measured memory with psychological tests. So they're looking at brain structure and at brain function. This study was published in the peer-reviewed journal, Alzheimer's and Dementia. And they found, on average, the more sugary drinks consumed, the lower the total brain volume and the lower the scores on memory tests. And here's where it gets really frightening. Compared with those who drank no sugary drinks, those who drank 1 or 2 a day. Now, and the interesting thing about that, I would love to see this redone with actual sugar versus high fructose corn syrup, because sugary drinks today in America means high fructose corn syrup, and I don't have any idea, if that had to do with it or not. But anyhow, compared with those who drank no sugary drinks, those who drank 1 or 2 a day had a reduced brain volume equivalent to 1.6 years of normal aging, and lower memory scores equivalent to 5.8 years of aging. Those who drank more than 2 drinks a day had decreased brain volume equivalent to 2 years of normal aging and lower memory scores the equivalent of 11 years. They controlled for diabetes, blood pressure, cholesterol, smoking, and all the other health things. He says we can't prove cause and effect, but they took everything out except the sugary drinks. This is spooky stuff. Spooky, spooky stuff. Finally, another piece from The Guardian this morning that I was reading that I thought was just fascinating and wanted to share with you. Let's see, who is the author of this? Lawrence Douglas wrote this. It's an opinion piece. The headline is Donald Trump's first 100 days were a stress test for democracy. And basically what he's saying is, okay, we're 3 months down the road, and what we have discovered is that we are not Germany 1933. He says we should be proud of the resistance shown by our civil society. Steve Bannon has not deconstructed the deep state, at least yet. We have confronted our representatives in town hall meetings, he writes. We have flooded members of Congress with letters and emails. We have organized ourselves into groups such as Daily Action, mobilizing the energies of millions unwilling to quietly acquiesce in the destruction of American democracy. And then he goes through a long list of things that we should be proud of, from our so-called federal judges, like the one at the island in the Pacific who stopped Trump's, sanctuary city ban, to the judge who stopped his travel bans, the judges, actually, that we have pushed back against fake news, that Steve Bannon has been largely marginalized, hundreds, if not thousands, of dedicated public servants and agencies from the CIA to the EPA to the Pentagon to the Department of Education remain distressed and appalled by Trump. These public servants have worked to keep the president in check by using two of the most powerful tools available to government officials, news leaks and bureaucratic inertia. The leaks in particular have helped bring an astonishing reversal in this administration's handling of Russia, from treating Putin as cozy partner to world menace. Finally, some credit must go to President Trump himself. In his sheer incompetence and inconstancy, Trump has emerged as our best bulwark against Trump. But something else is at work. As opposed to Bannon, a genuine radical with a grand vision, Trump has always seen something of an accidental authoritarian. And he wraps it up by saying, this is not to say that grave dangers do not remain and constant vigilance is not warranted. Trump's environmental policies may prove catastrophic. His foreign policy, mercurial and possibly non-existent, appears ill-equipped to master the challenges presented by North Korea, Iran, and now Russia. But 100 days in, we are entitled to a small measure of relief. Relief we have created for ourselves. And, it is true. It is kind of the good news. I mean, I hope I don't dishearten people by coming on the air every day and saying, okay, here's the horror story of what the Trump administration did today. Here's the weird stuff that the Republicans in Congress are up to. Here's how they're trying to destroy our democracy. Here's how they're trying to whack average working people. Here's where they're going after, anybody who's not a millionaire, basically. Well, and here's how the Republicans are trying to help and support their millionaire and billionaire buddies, give them more money, give them more power, give them more privilege. But the reality is that people are fighting back. People are pushing back. People are mobilizing. We're seeing right now across the United States and frankly around the world, while we're watching the rise of authoritarianism, as you're seeing, for example, in Turkey, where Erdogan just basically nuked constitutional democracy. And then Donald Trump called him up and congratulated him. We're seeing that, but we're also seeing the rise of populist and progressive movements. And that's a marvelous thing.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The question is, how long can the fascists hold on? I don't think that long. We'll be back. And it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today I'm reading from The Prophet's Way, A Guide to Living in the Now. It's actually a compilation of mostly, there's some commentary in there, but mostly it's diaries and letters that I sent to friends on travels around the world. And it's kind of a autobiography, I suppose, of sorts. This is from chapter, I don't know what the chapter number is. It's titled Life in a Teepee. It's on page 25. And it starts with a quote from Lenny Bruce. Every day people are straying away from the church and going back to God. My best friend through school was Clark Stinson.
We met when we were 13, and instead of pursuing the normal pastimes of teenagers, we spent our time studying Sanskrit. We had an old study guide book I found in my father's library, reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead and arguing minutiae from the Bible. Clark's mother was interested in metaphysics and shared a book called Autobiography of a Yogi with us. Years later, when I went to Detroit with her and Clark to attend an initiation in Kriya Yoga by Yogacharya Oliver Black, the oldest living disciple of Yogananda, I recognized Yogananda's Kriya technique as identical to an ancient Coptic exercise Master Stanley had taught us years earlier called the Cobra Breath. I introduced Clark to Master Stanley and Lee, and Clark and I began a serious study of spirituality. We were both in our late teens by then, and Clark had recently married. I was recovering from a painful breakup with a girlfriend, and we agreed that to do our spiritual work best, we should seek isolation. So Clark and his wife bought a teepee, and I bought one, and we three gave away everything else we owned in the world except some clothes and our spiritual books. We bought 100 pounds of wheat, 100 pounds of dried fruits, some basic camping equipment, and got a ride up into Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where an old trapper led us on a 3-day trek back into the Chippewa National Forest to a small lake that isn't on most maps. We spent the summer there, Clark and his wife on one side of the lake, me on the other. 3 days a week, we practiced silence and did meditation and prayer every day for hours. I had a pet tachnid fly, a small insect that looks like a honeybee but is actually a fly. When I'd meditate in the morning on my blanket outside my teepee, he'd come and hover just over my right hand as if he were drawing nourishment from me. Sometimes he'd hover there for as much as 20 minutes. Occasionally he'd land and walk around with careful steps like an astronaut exploring a distant but friendly planet. I also shared my teepee with a large and furry brown and black wolf spider who came out at night as the sun set and picked the sleeping mosquitoes off the canvas on the west side of my teepee. I watched the play of life and death, predator and prey. Here's an odd synchronicity that Carl Jung would have appreciated. I haven't seen a tachnid fly for years, but as I'm typing these words into a laptop computer on my back porch in Atlanta, one just hovered over my left hand for a few moments and then landed. He's here with me as I'm typing, sitting on my hand. One cold and rainy afternoon, Clark and I were walking through the woods looking for berries and edible plants. We'd gotten pretty skilled at identifying what was safe and what wasn't, and we're filling a bag with leaves and fruits. This must be what our ancestors lived like, Clark observed, hunting and gathering. Except we're vegetarians, so we're just gathering, I said, joking. But to Clark, it wasn't a joke. Seriously, what we call civilization started when humans started farming. But humans like us were around for tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of years before that, fully conscious, awake, aware, thinking and feeling just like us. But they were hunters and gatherers instead of farmers. I said, without agriculture, there'd be no civilization. It was an interesting thought. Remember Miss Hemmer? Clark said. Miss Hemmer had been our 8th grade biology teacher and one of the best teachers I'd ever known in my life. Clark and I had conspired to make her life difficult, but we also loved her and learned more from her each month than from any of our other teachers in a year. And she was a huge fan of Margaret Mead. Clark said, she said that in primitive societies, there isn't suicide, depression, drug addiction, all that stuff. The noble savage, I said, shivering. I'm skeptical and cold. And the Indians who lived here once were probably cold too. He shrugged and said, this life seems much more natural to me. At least I had to agree with that. A few days later, Clark came running over to my teepee with his Bible all excited. Look at this, he said, pointing to Genesis 4:2. It says, Cain was a tiller of the ground. The Bible is talking about how the first murderer was also the first farmer. And in the 25th verse, it makes it clear that Abel, the brother who was not the farmer, was the one who loved God the most. So what, I said. It's a classic archetype of the oldest child being the most beloved, but also the one who screws up. It's all over, from Greek mythology to Shakespeare. Don't you see, Clark said? Adam and Eve were gatherers like we are now. They walked around the Garden of Eden and picked up food. But then they tasted of the knowledge of good and evil, of life and death. That's your food supply. You live or die by it. When you live as a gatherer, you live by a whim of nature. If there's no food, you die. When you begin to store up food, you can defy nature and survive a drought. You then have the power to control life, the knowledge of life or death, or good and evil. So the tasting of the apple must have meant that Adam and Eve experimented with agriculture, and in doing so, they defied the God of nature. It's a warning. It's saying that the primitive life of hunting, gathering, and herding was more in accord with nature's way than is agriculture. Clark dove deep into the issue, but I didn't consider it all that important at the time. I couldn't see how when people started farming after the end of the Ice Age, it had been such a bad thing, After all, it brought us modern society and science. Clark, however, was totally certain that agriculture and what he called the organized ones were responsible for the coming death of the earth. The book, The Prophet's Way.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So Michael Flynn's problems, his lack of a security clearance, is now Obama's fault. This is the latest from the Trump administration. Oh, man. I don't get it. I don't get it. Andrew in Scottsdale, Arizona. Hey, Andrew, thanks for calling. What's on your mind today?
Tom, thanks for taking my call. I do like listening to you, whenever I get the chance. But I really think the biggest problem with the Democratic Party right now is that the Bernie-crats and the Hillary-crats need to, stop trying to divide, themselves and just, come together and just, get out and vote and start trying to get Democrats in there, whether they're like John Ossoff, who's probably more like a Hillary-crat, or the guy in Omaha, who's probably more of a Bernie-crat, just pro-life.
Totally agree with you, Andrew.
We need Democrats in there to stop the Trump agenda. I mean, like I said, he's going to end all regulations, specifically environmental regulations, as well as even probably some medical regulations that we need.
Yeah, this is, this debate is going on inside the Democratic Party. A couple of days ago, Tom Perez, pointing to the Democratic platform that Hillary Clinton ran on, said, this party supports the right of women to have an abortion, period. Safe, legal abortions. And so he would not be supportive of an anti-abortion candidate. Elizabeth Warren yesterday came out and said, there may be parts of the United States where being opposed to abortion is the only way a Democrat can get elected. And if that's the case, then we should have an anti-abortion Democrat. And I tend to agree with Elizabeth Warren. Even though my personal opinion about abortion is that it's up to, it's totally up to the woman and at least until viability, and that this should not be an issue that we're debating. But yeah, I think that Elizabeth Warren is taking that a little more inclusive perspective. It's interesting that the head of the DNC isn't, and I'm not quite sure what to make out of that. It really frankly surprised me to see Tom Perez say that. But litmus tests and things, we need to be bringing the Democratic Party together. We absolutely do. And thank you, Andrew. Well said. Michael in Westerville, Ohio. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. Yes, I wanted to talk about the president and his speaking for $400,000. Free speech is certainly a factor, but I think with a former president, there should be something like a revolving door applied, and the difference should be if the speech is going to be secret or open. I don't think that somebody's going to pay him $400,000 to speak openly to the population at large, but they will if they'll get a financial advantage out of it. And in that case, it's as though he's an employee of the people who have hired him to speak. And I think some sort of revolving door policy should apply.
I don't think it's quite that nefarious. I mean, back when Hillary was giving those speeches, the Republicans tried to make the case that it was nefarious, that she was basically getting in bed with the bankers and helping them out and all that kind of stuff. Well, President Obama's out of office now. He's not, and Cantor Fitzgerald, this investment bank in New York, they're always looking for big name speakers, and you call up the speaker bureau and you get a list of people, and you want the fanciest. I mean, this is status for the bank. That's why they're doing it.
It's going to be an open to the public or available to the public speech.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, it's not going to be open to the public, and that was. Yeah,
So in that case, he's using his knowledge from his years as president to provide advantage specifically to this one group.
Oh, I doubt that. I doubt that, Michael. Michael, I think you're reading way more into it than is there. My concern was just the symbolism of it, and the whacking upside the head I'm getting on Twitter is, basically, how dare you as a white guy criticize our first black president, and
I don't get that. I'm sorry, but but beyond that, I think that if you want an example of a post presidency that will inspire people to get involved in the political process, and particularly with the Democratic Party, look at Jimmy Carter. But anyway, Michael, I'm getting more and more uncomfortable with this topic as it gets racialized, and which is something I completely never expected. Which may be my white privilege speaking. Who knows? It may well be. Michael, thanks for the call. Russ in Portland. Hey, Russ, what's up?
Tom, I just wanted to let you know, and the American people, that the Republicans in the Congress are quietly readying a historic assault on 640 million acres of public land in this country. On January 3rd of this year, 2017, the Republicans in the House passed an obscure rules change, which, by the way, I only know about because of David K. Johnston's website, dcreport.org. This rules change values all public land and all the buildings on public land at zero. Now, why would they do a thing like that? Well, we go back to March 25th of 2015 when an amendment to the budget bill, Amendment 838, was passed by a 51-49 vote in the United States Senate. Amendment 838 calls for giving away all public lands to the states, counties, and certain rural municipalities. This would be the end of the legacy of the great president, the only Republican I would ever vote for, Theodore Roosevelt. Further, in case you had, I think you know about this, on March 21st, just passed, they passed SJ 18, which allows for the killing of wolf puppies and bear cubs on 76 million acres of federal wildlife refuge in the state of Alaska. So that basically these wildlife refuges, they want to turn them into game parks.
Right. This Uday and Kusei will love this. The Trump sons.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Because they're big game hunters.
Because, the idea is, we don't want wolves and bears killing any elk or deer. We want, the rednecks and the Trump boys to go out there and be able to kill them. Also, they are going to make an assault on the Endangered Species Act and the National Environmental Policy Act, which are the two laws that environmental attorneys use to keep the timber beast, as I call the timber industry, from cutting down the last native forests. We only have, in Oregon where I live, we are down to 4% when you take into account the fact that the Coast Range forest, which is where the really big trees were, is gone. I mean, it is history. I'm sorry to tell you. We're down to 15% of the Cascade Mountain forest, and the timber industry wants that last 4% here in the state of Oregon. People need to call their senators. Basically, this is where this stuff, if it's going to be stopped, it's going to be
stop the giveaway of federal lands. And the number for the
giveaway of federal lands, and stop the assault on the Endangered Species Act and the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA. They need to call their senators. There are Democratic senators who are weak on this. No matter whether your senator is Republican or Democrat, you need to call your senators and tell them you will not stand for the assault on public lands.
Yeah, I'm with you. I got it, Russ, and I'm with you. And the phone number for Congress is 202-225-3121. And Russ, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM in Portland, Oregon. I know they're doing a fundraising drive right now. Let me encourage anybody who's listening to X-Ray FM. And if you didn't know about this in Portland and now in Vancouver, they've got a new station in Vancouver, Washington. It's a great local station, a nonprofit station, and kick in, help out. Russ, thanks a lot for the call. Rich in Sedro-Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Tom, you pointed out repeatedly how the Republicans are so upset at using fear to motivate their voters. Well, we need to use that fear as well. And if you look at fear as a function of survival, the best political expression of modern day survival was James Carville when he said, "It's the economy, stupid." So now we take fear and survival, and now we need a bogeyman. Bogeyman is Reaganomics.
Yeah.
Down Reaganomics should be the two words coming out of every Democrat's mouth every time the camera hits them.
Yep.
It's the cause of all evil.
I agree. Rich, well said. Thanks a lot for the call. Jim in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'm not a Trump supporter, but I, like you, don't like everything we buy made somewhere else. So I had a, with Trump wanting to do a 15% corporate tax, I think he's not saying it, but I think that's going to come with a 20% VAT tax, which would be excellent.
Yeah, he's definitely not saying it because he's not going to do it. And I agree. I think a VAT tax would be a great idea. We're the only industrialized country that doesn't have one, and all the rest of the countries are using them as effective, functionally as tariffs. And we probably should put it at around 17%, which is where Germany's is, I believe. Most countries are in the 15 to 18% range. But yeah, Trump is, he's not going to do that. The Republicans will not let him do that. That's a new tax. Grover Norquist will not allow it. So, it's just, it ain't going to happen. VAT tax, by the way, is a value-added tax. It's a tax. It's where at every stage in the manufacturing process, when you add value to a product, you pay a small tax on it. So nobody gets hit with a giant tax. It is added to the price of the product. And then when you export that product, you can remove that VAT tax, which is an export subsidy. And when somebody imports something into your country, you add it to the VAT tax, which is functionally a tariff.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls after this. Stick around. Welcome back. Charles in Southgate, California. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, could I ask you a personal question?
It depends. I mean, you could ask it. I might not answer it.
Okay. I just to start off, are you a genius?
I don't know.
Oh, you've never been tested?
My IQ was tested when I was in elementary school at 141. And my best friend, his was 142, and he used to make fun of me and call me 141. But but I have no idea what it is, and I haven't been tested since then. And those tests are notoriously.
I was talking to you about.
There's a lot of areas, Charles, where I'm not a genius. I'll tell you.
Well, I've met two geniuses in my life, and I'd like to meet you, but I don't guess I ever will. But all this talk about, we can, turn things over passively. We can demonstrate. We can do this and that, to create a revolution, like our revolution.
Mm-hmm.
How many, revolutions like that were nonviolent have ever happened? And is
a lot of them
that you're against it is because all they'll do is call out the National Guard and kill us all.
No, Charles, we have had all kinds of revolutions that run along the lines of ourrevolution.com. The big ones, the obvious big ones, the end of slavery, the end of Jim Crow, the Civil Rights Act, the enfranchisement of women in 1920 or 1919, whichever year it was, the 20th Amendment, the right of gay people to marry, the legalization of abortion. There have the taking down of the tobacco industry as a major power and player in the United States while they were killing millions of Americans. Now they're only killing 500,000 Americans a year. The legalization of marijuana in state after state, and the decriminalization of medical marijuana in a majority of the states now in the United States. All of those were revolutionary acts, and they were all successful, and they were all bloodless. I mean, well, actually, the end of slavery was not bloodless. That was the Civil War, to some extent, to a large extent. But and slavery itself was just violent and bloody throughout the entire process. And arguably not even arguably, the chattel status of women up until 1920 was also brutal and often bloody. and many women were killed and beaten during the suffrage era. And labor unions, the labor rights. I mean, that was a revolution, that started in the 1880s, 1890s, and really, hit their stride in the early 1900s and finally came to full fruition in the 1930s with the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act. All of those things were revolutions. So I'm very optimistic, Charles.
Well, I'm glad that you think we have the time. I just, and I'm not sure that, violent revolution would ever work. There's too much police power in this country. But
well, and violent revolution within a country typically produces a bad result. I mean, that was the attempt. That's what the South tried to do. That's what the Confederates tried to do. It was a violent revolution against the United States of America. Didn't work. Our revolution against England was arguably not really a revolution. It was overthrowing a foreign occupying force because, people had been living on this continent for over 100 years at that point, and they considered themselves Americans, not Brits. And so, it was sort of like, the Afghans and the Iraqis trying to throw us out of their country. And that's not really revolution. Charles, thanks for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Ray in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Hey, Ray, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Listen, I just simply want to let you know that that the current run towards the cross line here with the budget,
right?
It has to do with the fact that they had to bring out tone and minutia to make this happen because Wall Street needs this sugar high.
Yeah.
And they need some assurance that this is going to happen.
Yeah, Ray, I can't hear you because you've got me on a speakerphone. I'm going to ask you to call back a little later. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I listened to you read the article at the beginning of the program, and I know this is 2 hours ago, so specifics are, and I had to go up. But Tom, I'm becoming increasingly concerned and annoyed with the Viva la Resistance seems to be quickly deteriorating into a lot of infighting and litmus tests and purity tests on the Democratic side. There's, from my point of view, and I think you know where I stand politically, this kind of petulant progressive tantrum is going to lead to 2 more devastating defeats in 2018. The Democrats will lose more seats in the Congress, and in 2020, I think they'll lose again. I really do. Because one thing I think the progressive wing, I guess that doesn't even want to be part of the party anymore, doesn't realize is they need all of the Democrats that didn't vote for Bernie in the primaries. They need those people to win.
Yep.
They need them.
Yep.
Just like the people, your regular, I guess we'll call them establishment Democrats, needed the progressives, people who weren't so jazzed up about Hillary Clinton. And the thing is, it doesn't matter. It's not Hillary. Republicans and Trump are going to do the same thing, the same undermining and demoralizing of the Democrats that they did this time, and it doesn't matter whose name you want to put on the ticket. They're going to do the same thing, and Democrats are prone to be going, oh, yeah. I mean, we're seeing this with John Ossoff, already picking on him, and this other person in Oklahoma for their stand. You got to get blue fannies in the seats on the blue side of the aisle.
Yeah, I totally agree, Paul. I totally agree. The point that I was trying to make, and maybe it was, maybe I did it very badly, that I got out of Thomas Frank's piece, because I've been there too. You go back to Michigan, you go to the industrial Midwest, is that the Democratic Party has lost millions of voters. And they've lost them based on issues that are traditionally the Democratic Party's issues, principally trade and jobs. And, the Clinton campaign understood this. It's the economy, stupid. And I'm as concerned as you are, Paul, about the future of all this. And I really think that if the Democratic Party, and I see the Democratic Party moving in the right direction, in my opinion. But if the party does not start talking about core economic issues and putting those front and center, the Democratic Party is going to be losing elections.
Well, that's true, but you have to look at it this way. This is
So how do we have this conversation? There's probably less than 1% of my audience listening are Republicans right now. How do we have this conversation inside the Democratic Party? Are you saying we shouldn't discuss it?
Here's a concept. When a big freighter like the Edmund Fitzgerald wants to start turning south in Lake Huron, they have to start turning the wheel long before they get to Lake Huron, right?
Yeah.
It's a long turn, but you have to move this big, heavy thing. So those of us who are very much, I don't know, I hate to call myself a progressive, but embrace the progressive values have to understand that it's, Tom, I'm a socialist. I have been since I was 13.
Well, this is why I said, Paul, you'll recall at the end of that rant, I said, we need, if there are places where an anti-abortion Democrat can win, we need to get an anti-abortion Democrat in there. If there are, I am not talking about party purity here. I'm talking about see, that's a social issue. I'm talking about exclusively in the realm of economic issues having to do with trade and jobs and pay and rights of labor. Exclusively in that realm, frankly, I think we actually should have party purity. Don't you?
Well, I look at it this way. Let me give you the analogy, and I'll answer it this way. If I give you a math test, or give somebody a math test, and they get 85%, let's say they miss 3 problems, do I not hire them because they don't? I look at it this way. They mostly understand how to solve the problem when they understand the problem. I just look at it this way. The ones you missed are because you don't understand the problem. And once you understand the problem, you'll have to agree with the right answer. And that's the way I look at somebody like John Ossoff, who says he's not for single payer. It's because he doesn't understand the problem. Once he understands the problem, then he'll agree with me on single payer.
I suspect that he is not. It would be interesting to get him on and ask him, why aren't you supporting single payer? Because it may simply be that he thinks in his district supporting single payer isn't going to fly. And if in his district supporting single payer is not a good idea, he shouldn't run on it.
That's right. And it might be that his position is that single payer is going to take some time, and it is going to take some time. You can't have it tomorrow. The system's too complicated. It would be. There's just too many moving parts to have to be sorted out. I'm for that, but I'm also willing to talk to people who say, well, let's move in the direction, but it's not going to happen overnight. But the first thing is we're not going to move in that direction until, like I said, you start turning the wheel on the giant freighter.
I wouldn't use the Edmund Fitzgerald as an example. I'm sorry, Paul. I interrupted you.
I said back to my analogy, we're not going to solve the problem until we start turning the wheel of the giant ore freighter in the direction. So you can't turn.
I think that happened a year and a half ago when the Democratic Party put together its platform. And all I'm suggesting is that, in particular with regard to the economic issues, Democrats need to support the Democratic Party platform. We all agreed on that. Anyhow, Paul, thanks a lot for the call. Been an interesting day. Been a real interesting day. Sam Sachs is going to be in for me tomorrow. I am off to moderate a political event, and I'll be back here on Monday. So in the meantime, have a great tomorrow. You're going to have a fascinating show, a great weekend, and don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It really does require you, all of us. It requires you. Tag, you're it. See you later.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.